Cersei Lannister sat on the cold stone floor of her cell beneath the Red Keep, listening to her own ragged breathing echo in the shadows. A torch sputtered in the corridor beyond, sending dancing flickers of light across the damp walls. She was alone in her disgrace, stripped of her regal gowns, robbed even of her usual black and gold silks. Her hair, already shortened once in a brutal act of humiliation, had begun to grow back unevenly, and she ran her trembling fingers through it, as though searching for a distant memory. If the rumors from the gold cloaks were true, the morrow would bring her sentencing. The entire city whispered of her downfall. But Cersei had learned to quiet the fury in her heart by forcing herself into that posture of defiance she'd always worn like a second skin. She found no comfort in the past now, only ghosts. Gone were her father's measured admonishments, his presence that had once loomed like a towering edifice in her life. Gone were Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen, each child taken from her by war or poison or their own unsuspecting innocence. And gone was Jaime, her beloved twin, dead or lost to her in every way that mattered. For the first time since she'd been a girl of 14, she felt truly alone. A queen with no kingdom. A lioness with no pride. Even the faintest echoes of Lannister cunning couldn't mask the truth. Cersei was now prey in her realm, hungry for her blood. She brought her knees to her chest, curling into a tight ball on the hard floor. The unyielding stone reminded her of the relentless cruelty she had inflicted upon others in her life, as though it sought to press that knowledge back into her bones. She had once gloated over the feat of her enemies in these very dungeons. Now she was just another prisoner. She tried to gather her thoughts. Her mind, once so adept at political maneuvering, felt slow as molasses. Fear gnawed at the edges of her consciousness, an incessant companion. She did not need a trial to know what shape her sentence would take. Death. Execution. The black of night, or the shimmering light of dawn, it mattered not. Her time was nearly at an end. King's Landing clamored for her head, and there was no shortage of lords in the Seven Kingdoms eager to see it displayed on a spike. The only faint glimmer of hope she harbored lay in the knowledge that Tyrion was still out there somewhere. Strange how the brother she had despised might be her sole chance at survival, but she doubted his pity extended that far. She had tried to kill him more times than she could recall. Why would he risk saving her? As that question hung in her mind, a distant scrape of metal against stone caught her attention. Footsteps approached. She scrambled to her feet, spine rigid, forcing her chin high in the air as the door to her cell swung open. In the torchlight stood a figure clad in the crimson cloak of the Lannister Guard, though these men, she knew, were likely under direct orders of the crown. Whose crown? That was the question, for King's Landing had changed hands too many times of late. The man stepped aside to allow a more authoritative presence through the doorway. Before Cersei's eyes, the subtle outlines of a face revealed itself. A narrow-lined countenance beneath closely cropped hair, with a mouth set in a perpetual scowl. "Get up," he said. "Time to go." Pride hissed within her. "I am Cersei of House Lannister. No one orders me about." She almost spat the words, yet her throat tightened. Instead, she mustered the coldness she had perfected long ago. "Lead the way, then," she replied icily. Her voice trembled just enough to betray her uncertainty, but she refused to beg. They led her through the corridors beneath the Red Keep, deeper into its belly where the flickering shadows grew monstrous. She saw no familiar faces, nor any sign of the finery once associated with her station. The one constant companion remained fear, trailing her steps like a dark dog. Eventually, a flight of rough-hewn stairs ended at a stout wooden door that opened into a broad chamber, brightened by torches and a single candelabra at a long table. To her shock, she recognized the setting. It was a place used for clandestine meetings under previous rulers. Now, 3 men and 2 women were seated at that table, quietly conferring. She recognized none of them at first glance, but the aura of authority they carried told her they were not mere guards. The man who had come for her placed a firm hand on her back and nudged her forward. Cersei straightened, summoning what little remained of her dignity. "Who are you?" she demanded, forcing steel into her tone. "And by whose authority do you drag me from my cell?" One of the women at the table turned to her with a thin smile. "I am Lady Selyse Rampton," she said, though the name meant nothing to Cersei. "I speak for the Crown's special counsel, You stand here accused of regicide, treason, and of inciting war against the rightful rulers of the Seven Kingdoms." Her words were clipped, rehearsed. "Before you protest, know that this council has already met extensively. The decision rests not on whether you live or die, but how." Cersei's breath caught, yet she held her head high. "Then let's get this over with," she said, voice filled with the brittle edge of bravado. "If you're to kill me, spare me the theatrics." "Theatrics?" Celisa echoed, raising an eyebrow. "My dear Lady Lannister, do not mistake me. This is an execution, but in name only. You've made too many enemies for a simple end, and the realm has grown weary of wasteful bloodshed. There is another way." At that, the man beside Celise, a tall, gaunt figure with parchment spread out before him, cleared his throat. "The Night's Watch will accept criminals who would otherwise hang," he said. His voice was reedy, passionless. "Lord Commander Royce believes it necessary to bolster the ranks. The wars have decimated them. They need bodies, skilled or unskilled." "Nair." The words tumbled across Cersei's thoughts like an avalanche. The Night's Watch. The Black Brotherhood. The frozen fortress of the north. The end of the world. Criminals joined the Watch as a form of penance, forswearing lands, titles, and families, living out their days in the shadow of the wall. It was the most final sort of exile. Cersei's stomach churned. To think that she, who had once commanded the highest seat in the realm, would be forced to don the black. She wanted to laugh at the sheer absurdity. Instead, she stood frozen, reading each face before her. "Think of it this way," said the gaunt man, pushing the parchment aside. "Your death would please many, but your penance in the Watch might serve the realm more. You'd be banished to the Wall, never to meddle in the affairs of the South again. You will have no heirs, no hold on Lannister wealth, no claim to any crown. You will be no one, Lady Lannister, no one at all." Cersei swallowed. The fury that had always sustained her flared like a wounded beast, urging her to lash out. She yearned to spit in their faces. How dare they reduce her to nothing? But all her life, she had fought to survive. And if she refused this, she knew the alternative. "Suppose," she said in a low, measured tone, "I choose the Wall. Is there any chance of reprieve afterward?" The second woman at the table, who had been silent until now, shook her head. "You know the oath as well as any in Westeros. You serve for life. A vow once made cannot be undone." "Then what is my choice?" Cersei asked. One of the men, older, with silver threading his beard, leaned forward. "It's no choice, my lady. The crown decides your fate. We merely offer a proposition that spares your life. Make no mistake, your life here in King's Landing is already forfeit. But if you agree to take the black, you live. Under heavy guard, you'll travel north and present yourself to the Lord Commander. From there, your life is the Watch's to command. It will be a bleak existence, but it is existence. The alternative, as the council sees it, is a public execution at dawn." "Nashrei." Cersei felt an almost unbearable humiliation roil inside her. She remembered Ned Stark's face when she had threatened him so long ago, telling him that when you play the Game of Thrones, you win or you die. She had believed herself unassailable then. And now, in an irony so savage it might have amused even Tyrion, she found herself threatened with that same fate. Only, unlike Ned, she was being offered a final mercy, the chance to live in ignominy rather than die. "I will join the Night's Watch," she said at last, every syllable coated in bitterness. "I will take your brand of mercy." A murmur rippled through the chamber. The words were anticlimactic, but the tension remained thick as old blood. Lady Celise nodded briskly. "Then so be it. This council dissolves. Take the prisoner back to her cell for the night. Come dawn, she'll not meet the executioner's block but a wagon north." And so Cersei was led away, the iron taste of defeat on her tongue. That night, she slept on her stone floor with an emptiness so vast it felt like she was falling through a void. In her dreams, ghosts swirled and danced. Tywin's disappointed glower, Jaime's silken voice, Joffrey's cruel, mocking laugh. All of them slipping through her grasp as she tumbled into dark oblivion. When she woke, she was hauled to her feet, allowed a meager meal of stale bread and watered wine, and then marched out into a courtyard where a plain wagon awaited under heavy guard. It was not yet dawn, and the distant stars were fading in the sky. She saw only a few faces in the pale lamplight, indifferent soldiers, watchers in the shadows. No crowd had gathered to jeer. No official send-off marked the fall of a once powerful queen. The world seemed to want to forget Cersei Lannister as swiftly as it could. She was chained at the wrists, the iron cuff biting into her flesh. When she climbed into the wagon, its single wooden bench offering no comfort, she realized there was no seat for a driver up front, just a black hooded figure whose eyes she could not see. Around her, armed men on horseback formed a silent escort, and the wagon jerked forward. She stared straight ahead, refusing to acknowledge the pitying glances cast her way. Pride still lived in her heart, though it lay battered and bleeding. They left King's Landing through the less trafficked western gate, avoiding the main thoroughfares. The city slumbered behind her. She did not look back, for to do so would rip fresh wounds open in her soul. She'd schemed and murdered and betrayed for this city, for this throne, yet it fell from her grasp as swiftly as sand through parted fingers. Perhaps she would never see it again. At the thought, an unexpected pang rose in her chest. She remembered with perverse clarity her mother's funeral procession through the streets, the first time she had worn a black veil. And now, all these years later, she wore the color again, though this time it would bind her destiny forever. They traveled in silence for many days. She was seldom allowed to leave the wagon, except for brief rests when they needed to water the horses or relieve themselves. The guard spoke rarely, if at all, and Cersei's attempts at conversation, or manipulation, fell on deaf ears. Once, she demanded to speak with the man in charge, but a curt voice replied that their orders came from the special council, and they had no interest in her protestations. She was forced to resume her seat with nothing but the emptiness in her mind for company. So she passed the time remembering every slight, every insult she had endured throughout her life. She let those memories stoke her anger, for anger was the only warmth she possessed out there in the wilderness. As the days turned into weeks, the air grew colder. Autumn was creeping across the land, and in the northern reaches, winter might already be sinking its talons into the earth. At night, the guards huddled around a small fire, while Cersei sat shackled at a distance, able to feel only the barest flicker of its warmth. They threw her scraps of food, salted pork, stale bread, water, and she hated them for it. She hated the pity in their eyes, and she hated her own degraded state most of all. She swore that if a chance arose, she would exact vengeance upon anyone who had treated her with scorn. Yet no chance came. The group was too disciplined, too well armed. The man in the hood who drove the wagon never slept near her or revealed his face, and she couldn't slip from her manacles without the key. Gradually, her anger began turning inward, turning to a bleak acceptance. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped behind rolling hills, they arrived at a large holdfast. A squat stone fortress, more functional than decorative, stood there surrounded by farmland that looked half dead from an early frost. She recognized the banner flapping from the battlements, 3 golden leaves on a field of brown. Housefaring minor lords sworn to whomever was strong enough to hold the crown. They were allowed through the gates, and for the first time in weeks, Cersei found herself in a courtyard bustling with life. A stableboy took the horses, while a steward approached, offering curt welcomes. The guards dismounted, and one of them gave instructions for food and lodging. At last, the hooded driver turned to Cersei. She stared into the darkness beneath his cowl, searching for a hint of compassion. He said nothing, simply tugged at her chain as though she were a troublesome hound. Silently, he led her to a small cell in the fortress's underbelly, barely an improvement over her last accommodations. Yet there was a cot stuffed with straw and a pitcher of water. It was something. She lay there, body aching from the travel, and shut her eyes. That night, her dreams were restless. She saw a wall of ice towering into a gray sky. She felt a bitter wind that cut through flesh and bone. She saw dead things marching, their eyes glowing with unnatural light, and heard wails echoing across a frozen wasteland. When she startled awake, she was drenched in sweat, the cell's darkness pressing in on her. For a moment, she almost wished for a swift death, if only to escape this dread that yawned in her mind. But dawn came again, and with it, another day's journey. Finally, after countless miles across the King's Road, and then veering westward, after farmland gave way to untamed forests and rolling heaths, the travelers turned north once more. The wind carried a chill that nipped at Cersei's cheeks even through the heavy cloak they had thrown over her shoulders. She had ceased trying to speak to her guards, for all her entreaties fell on ears as unyielding as stone. She had even grown used to the presence of the hooded driver, who guided the wagon with effortless, silent efficiency. The day they first glimpsed the wall, the horizon was cloaked in ragged gray clouds, and Cersei's heart pounded so fiercely she was sure the nearest guard could hear it. The wall rose like a colossal barrier in the distance, shimmering with the faintest glimmer of ice. She had heard tales of it all her life, but the reality was more awe-inspiring than any story, and more terrifying, for it was there that she would serve her life sentence. They arrived at Castle Black under skies the color of lead. Smoke curled from the chimneys, and men in black furs walked the yard. The fortress sprawled in a rough semicircle around the base of the wall, like a humble supplicant before a god of ice. As the wagon rattled to a halt, curious eyes watched. Here were men of the Night's Watch, some old and grizzled, some barely past boyhood, each wearing the same black cloak that Cersei would soon be forced to don. She could feel their stares. She wondered if they recognized her face from rumors or whispered tales. Perhaps the stories had traveled, even here at the end of the world. A tall man emerged from within the main hall. He wore black leathers, a cloak lined with fur, and carried himself with a quiet authority. His face was weathered, like an old oak, with lines bracketing his mouth and crow's feet at his eyes. He looked as though he had seen war and sorrow. One of the escorts approached him, murmuring quietly. The man nodded, glancing toward Cersei with an inscrutable expression. The chain was jerked, forcing her to step forward. The tall man folded his arms. "I am Lord Commander Royce," he said. His voice was gravelly, like stones rubbing together. "Though we've never met, I know who you are, Lady Lannister." She stiffened at the mention of her name. Once she might have corrected him, insisting he address her as Queen. But that time was long gone. "Then you know why I'm here," she said. His gaze swept over her, as though assessing a piece of armor for cracks. "Aye. The Special Council decided you were worth more to the realm alive than dead. They believe the Night's Watch might tame you, turn you into something useful." He let out a breath, his tone not unkind. "We are not jailers here, my lady. We're brothers and sisters in arms, protecting the realm from threats that most choose to ignore. But make no mistake, once you take the black, you are ours. There is no going back." "Never." She felt numb. Her anger, her shame, her fear, everything warred within her, but she locked it behind the mask of imperiousness she had worn since she was a girl. "I understand," she said. "So let's get on with it." A few men in black shifted behind the Lord Commander, as though uncertain of the best way to handle a woman of her stature, even a disgraced one. Finally, Royce gave a curt nod. "Escort her inside. She'll take her vows at sunset." "None." With that, two black brothers approached, unshackled Cersei's wrists, and led her across the courtyard. The guards who had escorted her from King's Landing did not follow. They lingered near the wagon, their task complete. She stepped inside the old wooden doors of the hall, feeling warmth wash over her. A smoky smell of stew and wood smoke filled her nostrils. Men sat at long tables, some eating, some sharpening weapons, some simply staring. The hush that followed her entry was palpable, as though she carried with her a storm. She was led through a side passage, up rickety stairs, into a small chamber with a narrow bed and a single chest. The men who escorted her set down a neat bundle of black clothing, then withdrew. Cersei stood there, noticing a flickering candle on a rough-hewn table. She touched the black fabric, running her fingers over it. The cloth was coarse, but serviceable. This was to be her new life. From gowns of gold-threaded silk to this. Tears pricked at her eyes, but she refused to yield to them. At sunset, a soft knock came at her door. A young woman of about 20 years, clad in the black cloak of the Watch, entered. She had auburn hair pulled back in a tight braid and a face set with quiet resolve. "I'm Sister Marley," the girl said. "I am to take you for your vows." Cersei nodded, not trusting her voice. She rose, dressed in the black tunic and breeches. The cloak draped over her shoulders. The boots were a size too large, but she tightened the laces until they stayed on. It all felt strange and foreign, and she tried to hide her trembling fingers. Marley led her outside, where the frigid northern wind slapped Cersei's cheeks. The courtyard glowed with torchlight, and a small gathering stood in a loose circle. Lord Commander Royce was there, along with half a dozen black brothers and sisters. One read from a leather-bound volume, reciting the familiar words of the oath. Cersei heard them as if from a distance, her mind drifting to memories of King's Landing, of the throne room, of Jaime's face under torchlight. Only when Royce turned to her did she snap back to the present. "Cersei of House Lannister," he intoned, "are you prepared to bind your life to the Night's Watch, to hold no lands, take no husband, father no children, and live and die at your post?" She swallowed, her throat dry. "I am," she said quietly, though it felt like an admission of defeat. "Then speak the words," he said. Cersei repeated them, her voice tight, each phrase hammering another nail into the coffin of her old life. "Night gathers, and now my watch begins." She spoke the vow that had once belonged only to men, but times had changed. War had ravaged the realm, the walkers had come and gone in some form, and the Night's Watch had learned that female recruits could be just as valuable. She let the words fall from her lips, each syllable a blade slicing away her identity. "I shall wear no crowns and win no glory. I shall live and die at my post." When she finished, the silence that ensued was like a tomb. Then Royce stepped forward and draped a new cloak around her shoulders. "Welcome to the Night's Watch," he said. His tone was free of mockery, free of warmth as well. He sounded simply resigned, as though greeting a new recruit who might or might not last the winter. And that was that. No fanfare, no roar of condemnation. The watchers dispersed to their duties, and Marley guided Cersei back to the small chamber. "Lord Commander said you might take a day to rest," Marley told her. "Tomorrow you'll have duties assigned." Duties. The very idea felt surreal, yet she simply nodded. Marley bid her good night and left. Cersei stood alone in the dark, the vow echoing in her mind. She had done what so many criminals did to escape the noose. She had taken the black. Now, all that remained was to endure it. Morning light found Castle Black stirring with activity. Ravens cawed from the rookery, men sparred in the training yard, and cooking smoke rose from the kitchen chimneys. Cersei woke in her narrow bed, momentarily forgetting where she was. The cold air nipped at her nose. She had slept fitfully, dreaming of the Red Keep's spires turning to ice before shattering in the wind. But the reality that greeted her was no less stark. She found Marley waiting outside her door, holding a wooden bowl. "Stew," Marley said, handing it over. "Best eat quickly. We've got a lot to do." The stew was watery but hot, with a few chunks of mutton floating among turnips. Cersei devoured it. Hunger outweighed pride now. When she finished, Marley took her through the winding passages of Castle Black, past the common areas, down to a large yard where the new recruits assembled. Most were men, though there were a few women scattered among them. They wore ill-fitting armor, some with threadbare gloves. A grizzled instructor barked orders, telling them how to stand, how to hold a sword, how to brace a bow. Cersei couldn't hide her disdain for the rudimentary lessons. She had learned how to use a knife from Jaime years ago, though she had never needed true proficiency, relying on cunning instead. Still, she stood among the recruits as though the entire affair were beneath her. But the instructor, a scarred man named Varley, had no tolerance for arrogance. When Cersei made a derisive comment about holding a training sword, he stepped forward, his face inches from hers. "You think you're above this, Lady Lannister," he growled. "You think the others care who your father was? Or your brother? Get in line, or you'll find yourself cleaning the latrines." "Now, Stangal." Fury flared in Cersei, but she swallowed it down. She knew better than to test them so soon. So she obeyed, holding the practice blade. She joined the novices in their awkward drills. Her muscles, unaccustomed to such strain, soon ached, and she cursed inwardly. Over the next days and weeks, she fell into a routine she loathed, rising before dawn, shivering in the cold, then stumbling through sword drills, archery practice, and chores that included mucking out stables and scrubbing floors. She had once commanded servants to do her bidding at the Red Keep. Now, she cleaned the filth of horses and men. Yet there was a grim purpose to the routines. The watch was not known for comfort, and each task was necessary to keep the fortress running. She saw how the older veterans performed these chores with stoic acceptance. They had no illusions. The men and women of the Night's Watch existed to defend the realm, even if the realm cared nothing for them in return. In time, Cersei's hands grew calloused, her arms steadier. She started to hold her own with the training sword, relying on a certain feral intensity fueled by her rage. Some recruits were younger, stronger, more agile, but none had quite the same wellspring of fury that Cersei had long cultivated. Gradually, even Varley grudgingly admitted she showed promise. Between training sessions, she spent long hours on menial tasks, or patrolling the wall's ramparts. The cold up there was savage. When she stood atop the ice, looking out over the snow-laden wilderness, she felt both awed and afraid. The wind cut through her like 1,000 tiny knives, and the vast expanse beyond made her realize how small her life in King's Landing had been, how trivial her schemes might seem to this endless north. At night she would huddle beneath a thin blanket, half hearing the howling wind. Sometimes she'd think of Tyrion, or Jaime, or her children. A flicker of longing would bloom in her chest, a fierce ache. But then she would remind herself that she was dead to them now, and they were dead to her. It was easier to bury the grief beneath layers of bitterness. One evening, after a punishing day in the yard, she caught sight of a newcomer to Castle Black. A tall figure wrapped in furs, flanked by 2 rangers. The man had silver in his hair, a lean face and eyes that flashed with cunning. He disappeared into Lord Commander Royce's quarters, but rumor spread quickly. It was Pettier Baelish, known as Littlefinger. Once, she had considered him an ally of sorts. They had conspired and backstabbed in the halls of power. Now, to see him here at the edge of the world made her stomach clench. What could he want in a place like this? She spent a sleepless night wondering. The next day she was summoned to Royce's study. She climbed the rickety steps with dread twisting in her gut. The door creaked open, revealing a small room with a simple wooden desk. Royce stood by the fireplace, while Littlefinger lounged in a chair, looking infuriatingly comfortable despite the cold. He wore a dark cloak lined with fur, the mockingbird pin still perched at his collar. "So," Baelish said, his voice as smooth as ever. "Here she is, the exiled queen, the lioness in black." She clenched her jaw. "What do you want?" The Lord Commander cleared his throat. "Lord Baelish is a representative of the crown, or one of them. He has come north with a missive." Littlefinger smiled thinly, though there was little warmth in it. "Times have changed since you last played the game in King's Landing, Cersei. There is no single power on the Iron Throne. There are factions, alliances, uneasy truces. But one thing they agree upon is that the Night's Watch must be supported, lest something dreadful come from beyond the wall again. And so, they send me to ensure that the lines of communication remain open." "Nan." She narrowed her eyes. "And what does that have to do with me?" Lord Commander Royce exhaled. "It seems Lord Baelish requested an audience with you specifically. I'd rather not bring old ghosts into Castle Black, but it's done." Baelish's thin smile remained. "I merely wish to confirm a rumor," he said, shifting in his seat, "that you indeed took the Black, forever forsaking your titles, your claim, your life in King's Landing. And here you stand wearing the Watch's cloak. My, how the mighty have fallen." "Nader Saline." She refused to let him see her hurt. "You've confirmed it," she snapped. "Now leave me in peace." He observed her for a moment, and she felt the weight of his cleverness pressing down like an invisible net, searching for any sign of weakness. "Peace," he mused. "Such a quaint notion. Yet, be that as it may, I have no desire to stir trouble. I only hope you find your redemption here, though I've rarely seen a lion content to watch from the sidelines." She wanted to throttle him. Instead, she turned to Royce. "If that's all, Lord Commander, I have duties to attend." Royce inclined his head. She turned, cloak swirling behind her, and left without acknowledging Baelish further. Once in the corridor, she leaned against the cold stone wall, letting her rage ebb. She had hoped never to see one of those scheming vipers from the south again, to never be reminded of her failures. Yet the realm had a long memory, and it would not let her fade so quietly. That night, she could not sleep. She remembered the conspiracies, the betrayals, the savage struggles for power. And she remembered the triumphs that had once fueled her pride. Now, She had to reconcile herself with a life of monotony and hardship, far from those battles. But the memory of Littlefinger's smug face festered in her mind. Something told her that even at the wall, she was not safe from the games of the South. In the days that followed, the fortress stirred with speculation about Baelish's visit. Some guessed he had come to discuss trade routes, others believed he carried secret messages from the crown. Cersei tried to ignore the rumors, focusing on her training and chores. With every night spent atop the wall, scanning the moonlit wilderness, she felt a strange sensation creeping into her chest, a grudging respect for the Night's Watch. They were outcasts, criminals, and bastards, yet they shared a singular purpose, a unity she had never truly known in the cutthroat environment of King's Landing. Here, each meal, each chore, was done collectively, for the good of all. No one bowed to her, no one spat in her face. They simply worked side by side. She still had to endure contempt from some who blamed her for their family's losses in the wars, but physical confrontation was rare. Everyone was too tired and too cold for petty brawls. Meanwhile, Lord Commander Royce was no fool. He assigned her to progressively more challenging tasks, testing her resilience. When she completed them without complaint, he offered no praise. Yet in his eyes there was a faint glimmer of acknowledgement that she had survived so far. Winter tightened its grip. Heavy snows fell, drifting high against the walls. Patrols returned with frostbitten fingers and grim tales of wildling raiders prowling the forests. Once, Cersei was sent on a short-ranging mission to gather firewood near abandoned crofters' huts. The wind whipped her face raw, and snow crunched beneath her boots. For hours, she and 3 other watchers trudged through waist-deep drifts, cutting branches from dead trees to haul back to Castle Black. She had never in her life done such menial labor, yet she pressed on, unwilling to show weakness. During a brief rest, the others shared stories of life before the watch, thieving in White Harbor, being abandoned by parents, or surviving as a street urchin in Lannisport. Cersei remained silent. What could she say? That she had once lounged in the Red Keep, sipping Arbor Gold, ordering men to their deaths. She knew how they would respond, with scorn or disbelief. So she kept her past locked away like a vile secret. When they returned, half frozen, a small crowd gathered to help unload the firewood. Cersei noticed Marley among them, her face flushed from cold. The young woman flashed her a quick nod of approval, then took an armful of wood inside. Cersei followed, letting the rush of warmer air embrace her. Her limbs were shaking with fatigue, and she dropped onto a bench by the hearth, panting. There, she overheard 2 brothers talking about rumors from the south, tensions between Highgarden and Dorne, something about a new alliance in the Reach. She felt that old stirring of curiosity, that flicker of the mind that once thrived on politics. But she clenched her jaw, forcing herself to focus on the present. No good could come from caring about those realms anymore. As the months stretched on, a pattern emerged in Castle Black. The daily grind of survival overshadowed all else. Cersei found an odd comfort in the routine, as though by occupying her hands and mind with the tasks of the watch, she could bury her regrets and bitterness. The nightmares persisted, but she learned to push them aside upon waking, to numb herself to the memories of what she had lost. Yet the realm does not stand still. One morning, a raven arrived, bearing news from King's Landing. Lord Commander Royce read the missive in his chamber, then emerged with a troubled expression. He summoned the senior officers and delivered the news. Hostilities had flared again in the south. Some barons had declared themselves independent. The crown was fracturing under multiple claimants, and the small folk were suffering once more. The watch would receive no further shipments of grain or supplies until the crown re-established order. Royce's face betrayed no fear, but the set of his jaw told Cersei he was worried. Winter was harsh, and a shortage of supplies could be fatal. In the days that followed, the rations were cut. Bowls of stew became thinner, bread scarcer. The Black brothers and sisters murmured anxiously. Wildlings were rumored to be gathering beyond the wall, though no one knew for what purpose. Under such strain, tempers flared. Fights broke out in the yard, culminating in one recruit losing 2 fingers to a knife slash. Royce imposed strict discipline, ordering more frequent patrols and drilling them in defense tactics. Everyone felt the tension mounting. Cersei tried to ignore the pangs of hunger and the creeping fear that they would starve. She had grown gaunt, her cheekbones sharper, her eyes sunken. Still, she refused to crumble. She took every assignment with stony determination. She would not die here in this frozen pit, after surviving so many threats in the south. If it took every scrap of will she possessed, she would endure. Amid the bleakness, a single shaft of light pierced her darkness, a sense of camaraderie forming with a few others in the watch. Marley, for one, seemed genuinely interested in Cersei's well-being, offering quiet words of encouragement. Another was Hallis, a former sellsword from the Stormlands who had ended up with a life sentence here, rather than be hanged. He was a better swordsman than most, and he recognized the glint of cunning in Cersei's eyes. Though they never spoke much, a guarded respect grew between them. One frigid evening, after a round of archery drills, Cersei was in the dining hall, gulping the watery stew they called supper. She overheard a conversation between two older veterans, men who had served through the darkest times. They spoke of White Walkers, of the nights when the dead rose. Though the threat had receded in recent years, quelled by the union of Dragonfire and Northern Steel, rumors persisted that some pockets of evil lingered beyond the wall. Cersei felt a shiver unrelated to the cold. She realized how little she truly knew of the horrors the Watch had faced. Her own nightmares of politics and assassinations paled in comparison to an army of the dead. When she returned to her chamber, she found a crumpled note slipped beneath the door. She looked around the corridor, saw no one, then bent to pick it up. By candlelight she read a single line, "We should speak." It was unsigned, but a small mockingbird symbol was etched in one corner, faint but unmistakable. Her blood ran hot. Baelish. She thought he had returned south, but perhaps he lingered in some corner of the fortress. She wondered what new game he intended. Crushing the note in her fist, she considered ignoring it. Yet the memory of his smug grin, and the knowledge that he might hold some secret gnawed at her. She told herself she no longer cared about southern intrigues, but the truth was more complicated. She would always be a lion, even if she wore black. And if Baelish had come here to meddle in the Watch's affairs, it could threaten the fragile order that sustained them in these lean times. That night, she slipped from her chamber after the change of the Watch, moving through shadowed corridors. She knew a disused storage room near the old tower, seldom visited at this hour. Entering, she found a figure standing by the narrow window, the moonlight revealing sharp features and a cloak lined with fur. Petyr Baelish turned as she approached, a ghost of a smile on his lips. "My dear Cersei," he purred quietly. "You look well, considering." She clenched her jaw, keeping her voice low so as not to echo. "Tell me why you're here, and speak quickly, or I'll call the guards." A soft chuckle escaped him. "We both know you won't do that. Curiosity still burns in that lion's heart, does it not?" She said nothing, resisting the urge to strike him. He sensed her anger, continued in his cat-like manner. "Word from the south is that old alliances are shifting. The crown is fragmented. Certain lords wonder if the Night's Watch might be a power worth courting. Supplies are short, as you've no doubt noticed, and the Watch is desperate. Some might be persuaded to favor a particular faction in exchange for relief." Revulsion filled Cersei. "You mean you want the Night's Watch to pick sides in a southern war? That's treasonous to the very oath we swear. Neutrality is the foundation of the Watch." Baelish smiled, a cunning glint in his eyes. "Neutrality is a splendid ideal, but hunger can override ideals quite effectively. Coins and wheat can tip the scales, if the right people hold the purse strings." He paused, letting the implication hang in the cold air. "You, my dear, have a unique position here. You could be instrumental in shaping the future of the Watch." Cersei almost laughed. "May, I'm an outcast with no lands, no title. The Watch has no reason to trust me, and the South wants my head. You think I have any power here?" He took a step closer, the moonlight illuminating the faint lines around his calculating eyes. "You have influence if you know how to use it. You were once the Queen Regent, the Lady of Casterly Rock in all but name, the daughter of Tywin Lannister. You understand politics and leverage better than anyone here. And the men of the Watch, many of them, still regard you with a certain fascination. A lioness in their midst. You could whisper in the right ears, steer the Lord Commander's decisions. He may not heed my counsel, but perhaps he would heed yours if you gave it to him, as if it were your own idea." "No. She shook her head, a strange mix of temptation and revulsion swirling within her. Yes, she had once reveled in such intrigues. But had it not led her to ruin? Yet old habits die hard, and a part of her thrilled at the idea of regaining some semblance of power. "And what's in it for you?" she demanded. "An ally here in the north," Baelish said simply. "One never knows how events might unfold. A friend in Castle Black could be invaluable in times ahead." He allowed a faint smile, letting the sincerity ring false in the silent air. "I might also ensure that certain shipments find their way north. Food, clothing, weapons. Surviving winter is paramount." Cersei fought to keep her voice steady. She hated how her heart hammered at the promise of power and the relief that supplies might bring. "And if I refuse?" His shrug was almost graceful. "Then you are free to starve with your brothers and sisters. I'll return south, and the realm will continue in turmoil, with or without the Night's Watch. But ask yourself, how many here will die if the Watch receives no assistance? Is your pride worth their lives?" She shivered from the cold or from the weight of his words. Her mind whirled. The Watch truly was in a dire state. And she, ironically, had the knowledge that might prevent a catastrophe. This was the Game of Thrones, resurrected in miniature at the edge of the world. "I'll consider it," she said, her voice tinged with resignation. His smile deepened. "I thought you might. I'll await your answer." With that, he moved past her, disappearing into the corridor. For a long moment, she stood motionless in the dark, staring at the spot where he'd been. The wind rattled the loose shutters, a reminder of the harsh winter outside. She felt caught between two lives, the cunning political player she had been, and the black-cloaked exile she had become. Her vow echoed in her mind, a vow of neutrality, of duty. But so did the reality of the Watch's desperation. If accepting Baelish's offer spared her brothers and sisters from starvation, was it not the lesser evil? Sleep eluded her that night. She rose before dawn, joined the morning muster in the courtyard, going through the motions of her duties while her mind churned. She saw the haggard faces of the Watch, men and women who hadn't had a decent meal in weeks, who coughed from the cold and worried about the next Raven's news. They had little, but they were her companions now. She thought of how many might perish if the supply lines from the south dried up completely. The realm didn't care about the Watch, not unless an existential threat reappeared. And by then, it would be too late. That evening, after her shift atop the wall, she found herself at the Lord Commander's door. She knocked softly. Royce opened it, regarding her with tired eyes. "What is it, Lannister?" he asked, stepping aside to let her in. She looked at him, this man who had taken her in despite everything, who had stoically guided the Watch through famine and bitter cold. She drew a breath, summoning the courage to speak. "I have information," she said, "about how we might secure supplies from the south. There's a cost, of course." Royce studied her face, suspicion tugging at his features. "Let me guess. Baelish approached you with some scheme." "He wants the Watch to favor certain factions in the south," she replied flatly. "It's monstrous to even consider. But if we don't, we may starve. We might have to weigh the lesser evil." "My dial." He turned away, running a hand through his gray hair. "Gods protect us," he muttered. "I swore to keep the Watch out of southern politics, but these are desperate times." She approached him slowly. "I won't act without your approval, my lord, but if we can strike a deal, ensure the Watch's survival." He barked a humorless laugh. "And in doing so, break our vows of neutrality?" The old knights who built this order would be rolling in their graves. But they're dead, and we're about to join them if we can't feed ourselves. He shook his head, then looked at her. "You said it. We must weigh the lesser evil. Fine. I'll listen to what Baelish has to say, but I'll make no promises. And if we do this, we do it carefully, with as little compromise as possible." Cersei nodded, relieved yet uneasy. The path ahead was strewn with pitfalls. She left Royce's chamber, her heart heavy. She could almost hear the voice of Ned Stark, that old paragon of honor, rebuking her from beyond the grave for dragging the Watch into the tangled webs of southern intrigue. She whispered under her breath, "Survival first." In the coming days, clandestine meetings took place in the Lord Commander's study, with Cersei present to interpret Baelish's slippery offers. They haggled, demanded more than he wanted to give, threatened to cut off negotiations. Baelish countered with coy insinuations and lavish promises. Through it all, Cersei realized how skilled she still was at this game, steering the conversation, feigning interest in worthless concessions, pressing for tangible gains, like shipments of grain, salted meats, and weapons. Royce, a man of simple honesty, was out of his depth, so he let Cersei take the lead, albeit with watchful caution. Eventually a bargain was struck. The Crown, whichever faction Baelish represented, would discreetly send supplies north under the guise of charity, enough to see Castle Black through the worst of winter. In return, the Night's Watch would quietly ignore certain smugglers passing between the Wall and the Gift, men who worked for Baelish's associates. They would also provide occasional information on wildling movements or northern lordships that might threaten trade routes. It was a slippery slope, a violation of the Watch's stance of strict neutrality. Royce only agreed to the bare minimum, but he felt he had no choice. Better a compromise vow than a mass grave of starved black brothers. After the agreement was sealed with a final handshake, Baelish turned to Cersei, his eyes gleaming with amusement. "You've done well," he said softly. "How does it feel, once again holding the fate of many in your hands?" She lifted her chin. "I do what must be done, not for your sake but for the Watch." His smile sharpened. "But of course, I knew you wouldn't let them perish. A lioness might lose her crown, but not her claws." She said nothing more. He bowed with a mocking flourish, then departed to finalize the arrangements. Lord Commander Royce slumped into a chair, rubbing his temples. "I hope we don't live to regret this." Cersei gently placed a hand on the rough wood of the desk. "We might," she said truthfully. "But at least we'll live." True to Baelish's word, within a fortnight, the first shipments arrived. Barrels of grains, crates of salted fish, casks of wine, and even some winter clothing. The Watch greeted these supplies with relief. The tension in the fortress eased a fraction as bowls of stew grew heartier. Men warmed themselves in thicker cloaks, and even the training yard seemed more tolerable. Yet a subtle undercurrent of unease flowed through them. Some guessed the shipments were not mere charity, and whispers spread that the Watch had sold its integrity. Cersei carried that guilt like a stone in her gut, but each time she saw a hungry recruit devouring bread, or a wounded ranger wrapped in a new fur cloak, she told herself it was worth it. Winter was cruel, and survival demanded sacrifices. She told no one that she and Royce had orchestrated the deal with Baelish, though Marley guessed something was amiss. The young woman gave Cersei sidelong looks, as though sensing that the ex-queen had dipped her hand back into the waters of deceit. As the cold months dragged on, Cersei's role in the Watch evolved. She was no longer just another recruit. Men and women came to her for counsel on practical matters: how to resolve disputes, how to handle rationing, how to negotiate with travelers seeking shelter at the Wall. She found herself giving advice on everything from leadership to punishment. Royce, burdened by the constant demands of command, consulted her more often than not. It struck her as ironic. She had once schemed to gain influence in the Red Keep, only to find a different brand of power here at the edge of the world. One night, as she patrolled the top of the Wall, snow swirling in the moonlight, she reflected on how her life had changed. The open sky and endless expanse of ice made the Game of Thrones seem distant, almost absurd. She was a figure from a realm that had little meaning in this wintry domain. Yet the realm still reached out, still tried to pull strings. She was tangled in them all over again. Deep in her heart, she felt a stirring she rarely admitted, a flicker of responsibility for the lives around her. She had once manipulated people like pawns for her own ambition, but this was different. When she watched recruits shivering in the snow, when she saw exhausted rangers returning from the wild, she felt an unexpected protectiveness. She had made a bargain with the devil, Baelish, to keep them from starving. Perhaps that was her first true act of selflessness. The dawn came, pale and cold, lighting the Wall with a fragile glow. She remembered how she used to watch the sunrise over King's Landing from her balcony in the Red Keep. The city sprawled beneath her in those days. Now, she looked across an endless wilderness, her breath turning to mist in the crisp air. She realized she no longer held illusions of returning south. That life was gone, and she was forged anew by the biting cold and the unrelenting demands of survival. She might never be free of her regrets, but she would not let them consume her. The lioness had found a new den, and though it was bleak and punishing, It was hers to protect. So she stood at her post, her gaze scanning the horizon. The wind lifted strands of her still-growing hair, now streaked with hints of gray. In the distance the sun rose slowly, a promise of another day. Far below in Castle Black's courtyard, she could see men stirring, their cloaks fluttering. She felt the weight of her vows settle on her shoulders once more. I shall wear no crowns and win no glory. I shall live and die at my post. And perhaps, in that moment, she found a glimmer of meaning in it all. She had played the game of thrones and lost. But here, in the austere quiet of the wall, she had discovered something she had never truly known. A chance to serve a cause greater than herself. The cold bit deeper, yet she stood firm, the black cloak wrapped around her, her eyes on the northern wastes. Dawn had broken, and the new day belonged to the night's watch. She let the wind carry away the last vestiges of her old self, scattering them like snowflakes across the icy vastness. Here at the end of the world, Cersei Lannister was reborn, no longer a queen, but a watcher on the walls, awaiting whatever came next. Cersei stood atop the wall beneath a sky fractured by stars. A blade of wind cut across her face and stole the warmth from her lungs, but she merely pulled her black cloak tighter around her shoulders, refusing to yield. Several months had passed since the secret bargain she and Lord Commander Royce had made with Baelish, and in those months the Watch had survived the worst of the season. The supplies that arrived, furtively and in small batches, had kept them from the brink of starvation. Barrels of grains and salted meats were doled out in careful rationing, while new boots and heavier cloaks saved many toes and fingers from winter's bite. Yet the question of cost weighed on her conscience, heavier than the drifts of snow piling along the ramparts. She glanced over the parapet. The sky had that pre-dawn pallor tinged with violet, revealing a frozen wilderness beyond. The wilderness stared back at her with silent indifference, as though reminding her that every mortal struggle meant little in the face of such vastness. Idly, she listened to the slow crunch of boots as another watch recruit made his rounds just out of sight. The routine was timeless, a slow circuit across ice and stone. In these quiet hours, she often reflected on how much her life had changed, or on how much she had changed herself. In King's Landing she had been surrounded by sycophants and serpents in equal measure, all moving to the clink of coins and whispered rumors. Here, the currency was simpler, shared labor, shared hardships, and the trust that you would keep each other alive in the face of a merciless winter. And yet, even the far north could not remain free of southern cunning. Baelish had made sure of that. She knew shipments did not flow from charity. Quietly, the Watch turned a blind eye to certain smuggler caravans passing near Eastwatch by the sea. Caravans that carried goods Baelish's unknown benefactors wanted transported without crown taxes or rival knowledge. From these hush-hush operations, Castle Black received badly needed supplies. A game of give and take, one that gnawed at the Watch's vow of neutrality. Lord Commander Royce was not a dishonorable man. Quite the opposite, but he had been forced by necessity to compromise, to let Cersei guide him down a path of uneasy bargains. She exhaled into the frigid air, watching her breath curl away. She had made her choice. She had brokered the deal. At least those under her command no longer collapsed from hunger during drills, and injuries could be treated with better stock of bandages and salves. Perhaps for the sake of survival their vow was not so unbreakable as the old knights had wanted to believe. Reality was a cruel teacher. She had learned that her entire life. Pulling her hood low, she started along the rampart. This particular watch shift lasted until dawn, and her bones already ached from the cold. She had never thought she would be the type to do manual labor, to endure hardship without the reward of station or gold. Yet here she was, the once queen regent, wearing the black, her hair gone coarse and her palms calloused from training. Part of her almost admired the transformation, though she never would have believed it possible back when she lounged in the Red Keep. Reaching the staircase that led down to the main courtyard, she descended, her boots echoing on the wooden steps. Snow had drifted in the corners, frost crystals catching the torchlight. She passed the yard, where a few watchers hunched around a brazier. Sensing her presence, they turned, but only one or two lifted a hand in greeting. She could sense their unspoken respect, even their curiosity, but also the gap that lay between her and them. She was neither friend nor foe, a figure apart. Her name Lannister still carried weight, both dreaded and revered. She ducked into the warmth of the common hall. The stale smell of sweat and boiled cabbage lingered in the air, but it was far preferable to the unforgiving winds outside. At a long table, half a dozen men and women in black cloaks spooned up bowls of morning porridge, quiet but companionable. Over time, the Night's Watch had grown more diverse. After the wars and the White Walker threat, they had begun accepting women on a broader scale. Cersei recognized a few. Sister Marley, with her auburn hair and quick smile, who offered Cersei a curt nod. Next to her sat Halis, the ex-mercenary, rolling his shoulders as though to work out a kink. Cersei inclined her head in greeting, but she did not linger. She went to the large kettle at the center of the hall and ladled herself a bowl of the thick, pasty porridge that had become one of their staples. An older watchman, Garth, sat slumped at a nearby table, massaging one of his knees. He was the sort who kept mostly to himself, seldom speaking. But this morning, he squinted at her. "Good shift?" he asked. She gave a shrug. Good as any shift in these winds," he harumphed. "Winds will get worse, they say. Some men returning from the Shadow Tower claim the snow's drifting higher than a horse's head. We'll be lucky if we can keep the gates clear." She spooned the porridge into her mouth, tasting something faintly sweet. Someone must have added a dash of honey. "We'll manage," she said. "We always manage, one way or another." Then he fell silent, lost in his own thoughts. She finished her meal, the warmth spreading through her belly. Her limbs still felt stiff, so she sat a moment longer to let that fleeting comfort envelop her. She could hear the low murmur of conversation from other watchers, a story about a near accident on the ice, a rumor that more wildlings had been seen in the haunted forest. Since the Great War against the others, the wildlings had been more or less integrated into the realm's northern territories, but pockets of outlaws still roamed, bitter and suspicious of any southern rule. There were also tales that a few monstrous creatures, half forgotten by men, still lurked beyond the wall. Cersei paid these stories the same wary attention she had once given the small council's gossip. If enough people spoke of them, it was unwise to dismiss them as mere rumor. Finishing her bowl, she rose and quietly made her way to the corridor leading toward the Lord Commander's office. His door stood slightly ajar, candlelight flickering from within. She rapped on the wood with her knuckles. "Enter," Royce said, his voice gruff from poor sleep. She slipped into the chamber and closed the door behind her. Royce looked up from a small mountain of parchment on his desk. Deep lines etched his brow, and gray stubble dusted his chin. "You look half frozen," he remarked. "It's the wall, my lord. One either adapts or curls up and dies." He leaned back, stretching his shoulders. "Too true. I've just received a raven from Eastwatch. Captain Morn says the supply deliveries have arrived safely from that last shipment, but the men there are noticing activity from ships bearing foreign flags, merchants from Bravos, maybe Lys. They're docking nearby to unload contraband, likely more of Baelish's associates. He wants to know if we're expected to offer them free passage, too." Cersei felt a flicker of unease. "Did Baelish say anything about opening the ports to foreign vessels?" Roy shook his head. "Not in so many words. He only implied that we'd turn a blind eye to certain caravans. Now these damn Lyseni sailors show up with questionable cargo. Captain Morn suspects they're smuggling goods for the Crown's black market or for different factions. We know how the realm is these days. Everyone's out for a slice." She let out a measured breath. "We can't just shut them out. We need the shipments. If we make a fuss, Baelish might cut us off." Royce drummed his fingers on the desk. "But if we expand the pass we're granting, what's next? Perhaps the Watch becomes the kingdom's largest smuggling front. That's not what I signed up for." Cersei couldn't help a wry smirk. "Nor I," she said softly. "But I suspect if we press Baelish for clarity, he'll give us slippery words. The question is, do we want to risk it?" Royce sighed. "No, Torians. Not while winter still rages. If we survive to see spring and the realm stabilizes, we might reassert our neutrality more forcefully. For now, pass a message to Morn. Tell him to be discreet. Don't hamper legitimate trade. If it keeps us fed, so be it. But if anything too dangerous crops up, he's to report it." "No." She nodded. "I'll draft the raven at once." Her eyes lingered on the piles of parchment. Are you receiving more pleas for help from the nearby villages? Royce rubbed his temples. Yes. Some hamlets south of the new gift have lost livestock to roving brigands. They beg for the Watch's protection, but our numbers are stretched thin. We can barely keep our own outposts manned, let alone patrol farmland miles away. She folded her arms. In ordinary times, the local lords or the crown should handle that, but the crown is too fractured, and the local lords might be in open conflict or too impoverished themselves. A humorless laugh escaped him. A cursed time indeed. I miss the days when all we had to worry about were a few wildlings. His gaze flicked to Cersei. Have you any suggestions? Your experience with southern lords might be helpful, if these villages have sworn to a certain banner. She considered. Well, many of the smaller houses near the gift were once sworn to House Stark, or to whomever rules the North now, but the North is still battered from the war. They might not have men to spare. We could try to broker an arrangement with them, though. If we protect their holdings, perhaps they could send us some provisions in return. Grain from whatever harvest they manage. Let them see that the Watch isn't entirely aloof. Royce listened, his expression thoughtful. It's a gamble. Our vow of neutrality sometimes means we don't entangle ourselves in local feuds. But perhaps it's time we adapt. I'll pen a letter to the Northern Lords, see if any are receptive. He shot her a wry look. I never imagined I'd spend my final years as Lord Commander negotiating trade deals and local protections like a minor petty lord. But that's what we have, I suppose. Times change, Cersei said, her voice quiet. Royce just nodded. Then he handed her a small scroll. Send this to Eastwatch, then get some rest. I heard your watch shift was the midnight round. She took it, bowed her head, and departed. She felt an odd stab of camaraderie for this old soldier, who had tried to preserve the Watch's traditions while wrestling with the chaos of a world in flux. Perhaps deep down she admired him as a leader far more than she'd ever admired King Robert, or even her own father. Tywin had ruled with cold brilliance, but there was always a sense of cruelty to it. Royce had no illusions of grandeur, only the weight of duty. It was a burden Cersei herself was beginning to understand for the first time. She made her way to the rookery, where dozens of ravens nested in wooden cages. The acrid smell of droppings and old straw hung in the air. Maester Arliss, stooped and balding, moved about with practiced ease, checking the health of the birds. He glanced up as she entered. Lord Commander has another missive for Eastwatch, he asked. Yes, Cersei said, handing it over. He wants it sent at once. Arliss gave a curt nod, selecting a strong raven and tying the small scroll to its leg. With a gentle push, he sent the bird flapping into the gray sky through a narrow window. For a moment, Cersei watched it vanish into the distance, carrying their precarious deals and uncertain future on its wings. She turned to leave, but Arliss's voice halted her. Lady Lannister, he said gently, or should I say Sister Lannister? She bristled at the address, though he meant no offense. What is it? His eyes were warm with a paternal kindness. I've seen many come through these halls. I've also seen many ravens bearing news from the south. I know the supplies keep arriving in suspicious ways, and I know it must weigh on you. So I want you to know that, for what it's worth, you've helped keep this place alive. No. She was startled. Maester, He raised a hand to forestall her protest. I am not blind to the complexities, nor do I judge. Just remember, sometimes we do what we must. He offered a small bow. Thank you. Cersei's cheeks warmed with unexpected gratitude. She nodded, unable to find words. Then she slipped away, her heart oddly lightened. It was strange to realize that, in her own twisted way, she had found a measure of redemption. The wily schemer who once waged private wars in King's Landing was now funneling resources to keep a garrison of outcasts alive. Or was it truly redemption? She couldn't be sure. Survival was neither wholly noble, nor wholly villainous. It was simply necessary. She climbed a flight of stairs to her chamber, which was little more than a cramped cell with a narrow bed and a small chest for her few belongings. Her body urged her to sleep, but her mind buzzed with 1,000 concerns. She wondered about the villages near the gift, about the next shipments from Baelish, about the possibility that the Watch might become a glorified mercenary company if these alliances deepened. Then she wondered if Jaime was out there somewhere, if Tyrion still drew breath across the sea. Did they ever think of her? Or had she become a footnote in the realm's history? The last thought made her stomach clench. She pushed it away and sank onto the straw mattress. She dozed off, drifting in and out of restless dreams. The Red Keep crumbling under a fierce northern wind, her children's faces blurred by falling snow, Tywin's voice echoing in an empty throne room. She jolted awake sometime later, uncertain if an hour or half the day had passed. By the angle of the light that filtered through the arrow-slit window, morning was well advanced. A sudden knock at her door made her sit upright. She called for whoever it was to enter. The door creaked open, revealing Haley's. He was a tall man with a grizzled beard and scar above one brow, a remnant of a sellsword brawl. He inclined his head. "Apologies for disturbing you. The Lord Commander wants you in the yard." Cersei took a steadying breath, running a hand through her hair. The old tuft had grown to a short, uneven bob, streaked with a few strands of gray that she noticed with some resignation. She rose and grabbed her cloak. "What is it?" Haley shrugged. "He didn't say, just that a group of new recruits arrived and he wants you to see them." Frowning, she followed Haley through the dim corridors and out into the courtyard. The fresh air hit her like a slap, but she ignored the chill and surveyed the scene. At least 20 new arrivals stood in a rough line near the center, guarded by a handful of black brothers who watched them warily. Most looked like criminals, scruffy beards, sunken cheeks, eyes that darted nervously. A few seemed more robust, possibly knights or soldiers who had committed some offense. And sprinkled among them, 3 women stood, each sporting equally hardened expressions. Lord Commander Royce stood near the front, arms folded. Sister Marley and the scarred trainer, Varley, flanked him. When he spotted Cersei, Royce waved her over. "These are our fresh recruits," he said quietly. "Sent by southern lords or city jailers, part of the deal that men can choose the watch over the rope. Not exactly an inspiring bunch, but we need the manpower." Cersei eyed the recruits. "They don't look too disciplined." Royce snorted. "They're not. But we'll do what we can." Their backgrounds vary. Some are pickpockets, 1 or 2 are said to be murderers. There's a pair of hedge knights who lost a bet or slighted the wrong lord. And those 3 women apparently deserted a battlefield, or so the jailer's letter claims. Still, better they serve than hang, so we'll put them to work. Problem is, there's some trouble stirring among them already. "One, nor see." He gestured toward a sullen, hulking figure with a thick black beard and a broken nose. "Calls himself Gask. He's been causing tension. Made a comment about not serving under a woman, let alone taking orders from the likes of her. He meant you." "They." The old familiar anger twisted in Cersei's gut. It had been a long time since she faced open scorn on account of her gender. Here in the Watch, ironically, people mostly just wanted to survive. "Let me talk to him." Royce raised a brow. "You sure?" She nodded. "I'll manage." Royce gestured for Varley to bring Gask forward. The big man shuffled out of the line, manacles still on his wrists. He held Cersei's gaze with defiance. A purple bruise mottled his cheek, probably from the scuffle that preceded his arrival. Cersei stood a few paces away, meeting his stare with a measured calm. "Your name is Gask." He spat to the side. "Ay." She held her hands clasped behind her back, reminiscent of a queen's posture. "You've taken the black," she said. "That means you're under the command of the Lord Commander, and those he entrusts with authority. Here rank isn't given by birth or gender, but by duty. Do you understand?" He sneered. "I understand I was given a choice. Lose my head or march up here and freeze my balls off. Didn't say nothing about taking orders from Lannister scum or a woman who's no queen of mine." Cersei felt the old lioness stir in her chest, the ferocity that had once guided her in the red halls of King's Landing. But she kept her tone ice cold. "What you think of me doesn't matter. You've chosen the Night's Watch over death. That means you'll do as you're told, or you'll be disciplined. If you refuse to follow orders, you'll find yourself facing the sword anyway, one day or another. Now," he let out a rough laugh, "we'll see how far your threats go." "Threats?" Her voice was as even as the frozen ground. "Yes, Gask, consider it a threat. The Watch can't afford insubordination. The moment you become a liability, you'll be locked up. If we can't feed or clothe you, you might just be put out in the cold, left to your fate. We have few illusions here." He glowered but said nothing. Some of the new recruits shuffled uncomfortably. The older watchers remained silent, letting Cersei handle it. Gask's gaze flickered across her face, searching for weakness. Whatever he found or didn't find, he eventually lowered his eyes a fraction. "Fine," he muttered. "I'll do my part." She inclined her head, an imperious gesture. "Then get in line with the others. You'll start training with Varley tomorrow. Don't give him an excuse to break your bones." The big man slunk back into the line, his shoulders hunched. Royce gave Cersei a curt nod of approval. The new recruits were then ushered into the fortress, where they would be stripped of their old clothes, fed a meager meal, and assigned sleeping quarters as well as menial tasks. Varley busied himself organizing them into smaller groups, barking orders. The courtyard bustled with movement, the forging of new links in the Watch's ragged chain of humanity. Cersei lingered, watching Gask vanish into the keep. The memory of his sneer left an unpleasant taste in her mouth. Men like him had roamed King's Landing too, brutes who believed strength came from cruelty. She had once manipulated such men by dangling coin or threats. Now she'd have to rely on the authority of her black cloak, a cloak that signified duty, not cunning. It was a different dance, but one she was learning step by step. When the courtyard cleared, Marley approached. "Well handled. I was ready to step in if he tried to strike you." Cersei shrugged. "He's a coward like most bullies. He just needs to see that defiance earns him nothing." Marley frowned, her pale eyes flicking to where Gask had disappeared. "We'll be mindful of him. Sometimes new recruits come from the worst pits of the realm, especially after so many upheavals. The gallows would have been kinder to some." Cersei didn't disagree. "How goes the training with the other novices?" Marley's freckled cheeks flushed. "Well enough. 2 have shown promise with the bow. One young lad can't even hold a sword properly, but he's quick on his feet. We'll see if he can be made into a ranger." They chatted briefly about the daily routines and where each newcomer might fit best. Then Marley was called away by another Watch sister. Cersei stood alone in the courtyard, letting the icy wind whip around her. The sky had brightened to a dull white, and flakes of snow were drifting lazily. She wondered how many more criminals and outcasts would arrive before winter loosened its grip. The Watch's numbers were slowly swelling, yet many were untrained, fearful, or simply desperate. The idea of forging them into a coherent force seemed monumental. Midday found her helping supervise the distribution of supplies. Barrels of salted fish were opened in the storage cellars beneath the keep, their pungent smell almost overpowering. A few watchers stood guard while others portioned out the rations. 2 fillets per recruit, said old Garth, who had been assigned supply duties. He pointed with a shaky finger. Any more than that, we'll run out next week. Cersei made sure the novices waiting in line didn't try to filch extra. Some of them stared at her with uncertain awe. They knew the rumors that she'd once been a queen, that she'd once had absolute power. Now she stood here in the damp cellar, tallying their shares. Occasionally one would mumble thanks, and she would nod curtly. By the time the line ended, her feet ached, and she smelled distinctly of fish. She slipped outside for air, inhaling the fresh cold that stung her lungs. 2 recruits passed by, lugging sacks of oats, complaining about the wait. She recognized one from the morning batch of arrivals, a scrawny lad with watery eyes. He cast her a fearful glance, as if uncertain whether she might strike him for whining. She shook her head. "You'll grow stronger," she said, not unkindly, "if you keep working." He blinked, then nodded vigorously before trudging off. Strange, she thought, how the black cloak made her both a figure of authority and scorn. In King's Landing she'd worn gowns of gold and velvet, expecting bows and curtsies. Now, a single practical garment marked her as something akin to a commander, at least in the eyes of novices. It was an odd shift in perspective, but she took it in stride. She was too tired for pride. Later, she climbed to the top of the wall for her late afternoon shift. The sky was leaden, snow falling more thickly. Cersei found herself paired with Hales, the stoic ex-sellsword. They stood side by side, peering out into the white haze beyond. Below, the forest seemed like a blanketed dreamscape with only the tallest pines visible. The wind moaned along the wall, and each gust threatened to knock her off balance. Hales broke the silence. So, this is what you wanted when you took the black. Guarding an endless stretch of ice in a storm. She let out a small laugh, though it held no humor. I wanted to keep my head. This was the price. He looked at her from the corner of his eye. Are you ever sorry you didn't choose death? She stiffened, considering. I've asked myself that. After I lost everything in the south, it might have been easier to let them kill me. Another gust of wind nearly stole her next words. But I'm still breathing, so perhaps I made the right choice. Perhaps. Hellas's voice was contemplative. I was sentenced for killing a lord who tried to cheat me of my wages. I don't regret it, but I regret not being smarter about covering my tracks. Anyway, I ended up here. Better than dancing on the gallows, though sometimes I wonder if it was worth it. No. Life is always worth it, Cersei said, surprising herself with the conviction in her tone. As long as there's some chance to shape your fate, to do something with it. He studied her quietly. You're not the same woman who arrived here in chains. You've changed. She gave a short nod. We all have, I think. Then she turned back to the swirling snow, letting the subject drop. She did not care to dissect her transformation too deeply. She only knew that a year or two ago, she could never have imagined speaking to a lowly mercenary about the value of life. She couldn't have imagined feeling responsible for others, not merely as pawns but as real people. A new self-awareness flickered in her mind, and she let the silence carry it away on the wind. By evening, the storm intensified. Patrols struggled and the watch changed more frequently so that no one would risk frostbite. When Cersei's relief came, she descended the great switchback stair. Her fingers were numb despite the gloves, her cheeks stung from the cold. Inside the keep, she warmed herself by a hearth in the common hall. The chatter inside was subdued. The storm demanded cautious energy. A few watchers drank watered ale, others spooned stew. Some dozed in corners, arms folded over their chests. Marley came in, stamping snow off her boots, her braid flecked with white. Heard the winds picking up on the eastern side, she said to Cersei, rubbing her hands before the fire. A small group of rangers is overdue from patrol. How overdue? Cersei asked. By a day, at least. We're hoping they hold up in a wildling hut to wait out the storm. But if they don't show by dawn, the Lord Commander may send a rescue party. Never mind. Cersei felt a twinge of concern. Rangers often disappeared out there, but with every missing patrol came the dreadful possibility of an ambush or an accident on thin ice. I'll go if he needs me, she said. I haven't been on a proper ranging in weeks. Marley nodded. We'll see what Royce decides. As if on cue, Halleys entered the hall, shaking off the cold from his cloak. He spotted the two women by the hearth and approached, his breath still visible in the frigid indoor air. Commanders called a meeting. Senior members only, including you, Lannister. He glanced at Marley. You as well. They followed him through a cramped corridor to a small chamber that Royce used for war councils. It was a low-ceilinged room with a circular table and a battered map of the north pinned to one wall. Royce stood at the head of the table, along with Varley, the scarred trainer. Maester Arliss was also there, tugging on the sleeves of his robe for warmth, and Garth, representing the supply quarter. 3 other watchers, including the ranger captain, completed the group. Royce wasted no time. The storm is likely to last at least another day, he said, his voice calm but forceful. We have a patrol missing, 5 men led by Tomrek. They were to scout an old wildling cache southeast of here and return by dusk yesterday. We have no ravens from them. If they're stranded or injured, we owe it to them to mount a rescue as soon as is feasible. Barley nodded. The risk is high in this weather, but so is leaving them to freeze. Royce's gaze flickered to Haley's. I want you to lead a small search party at first light. Take 3 or 4 capable watchers. See if you can follow their trail. If the storm is too fierce, pull back. When it's inside already. Haley's inclined his head. Understood. Royce turned to Cersei. I'd like you to go as well. You've proven you can handle the cold, and Tomrek's a friend to many here. Morale will suffer if they believe we won't even try. Cersei didn't hesitate. I'll join. Royce exhaled in relief. Good. Now, before we finalize that, we have another matter. Eastwatch sent word that a Braavosi ship arrived with cargo that seemed bound for the Watch. But the ship turned back south just as quickly. We suspect it's Baelish's doing, possibly diverting supplies to a different client. This might mean he's juggling multiple sides. We can't rely solely on his shipments going forward. No. A chill that had nothing to do with weather worked its way down Cersei's spine. So Baelish was playing them more brazenly. She had expected no less, but it still grated that they were at his mercy. "What do you propose?" she asked quietly. Royce glanced at her and then at Maester Arliss. "We might need to make overtures to a different faction, or at least a second contact. But we'll deal with that once we see how this storm plays out and confirm we haven't lost half our rangers. If we need to expand our smuggling pipeline, I'll call on your counsel again, Sister Lannister." No. The meeting dispersed soon after. The Watchers filed out, each weighed down by the bleakness of the tasks ahead. Cersei lingered, exchanging a few subdued words with Royce, then made her way back to the common hall. She tried to eat some bread and stew to strengthen herself for the next day's rescue attempt, but her appetite was meager. Worry churned in her gut, worry for the missing men and for the precarious future of the Watch's supplies. That night, she slept in fits. She dreamed of an endless corridor in the Red Keep, doors slamming one after another as she ran, barefoot and clad in black. She dreamed of a frost-covered iron throne with icicles hanging from its twisted metal, and of a cold voice whispering her name from the shadows. When she woke, her heart pounded, and she stared at the darkness for a long moment, trying to recall where she was. Then came the realization that she was in a small cell at Castle Black, not a gilded cage in the south. She closed her eyes, feeling an odd mixture of relief and sorrow. Before dawn, she rose and dressed in her warmest furs. Downstairs, she found Haley's, Marley, and two others, Rogden, a rangy young man with decent survival skills, and Sierra, a quiet but observant recruit who had proven adept at tracking. They carried rope, hatchets, flint, and small packs of food. The courtyard was dark, the sky still spitting snow. A handful of Watchers gathered to see them off, their breath steaming in the cold gloom. Royce arrived to give them final instructions. "Stick together," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Search near the route Tomrek planned to take. If you find no trace by midday, return. We can't risk losing 2 patrols." Haley's nodded. The gatehouse slowly opened to reveal a swirl of gray and white. Cersei pulled her hood low, bracing for the wind's onslaught. Then the group set out into the frozen wilderness, footsteps crunching through half-frozen drifts. The wall of snow cut visibility down to mere yards, so they walked in tight formation, Haley's at the front, Cersei and Marley in the middle, Rogden and Sierra bringing up the rear. They marched for an hour with little conversation, each breath forming clouds of vapor. The terrain sloped downward, dotted with sparse stands of pine. Great mounds of snow clung to the branches, sometimes sliding off in soft cascades. Beneath the snow, jagged rocks and hidden roots threatened to trip them. Twice, Haley's paused to check their bearing with a battered compass. The wind moaned through the trees, an eerie sound that set Cersei on edge. Eventually they spotted tracks partially filled by snow. Haley's knelt to examine them. "Men, maybe 4 or 5, he said. "A few days old. Could be Tomrek's group." They followed the tracks eastward, forging through drifts nearly to their thighs. Cersei's lungs burned from the cold air, and her legs ached, but she pressed on. When she felt her stamina waver, she clenched her fists, remembering the countless trials she had overcome. She had endured worse humiliations than cold. They continued until the sun was a pale glow behind layers of gray cloud. The tracks faded in an area where the wind must have swept the snow clear. Sarah scouted ahead, scanning for any disturbance in the underbrush. At last, she signaled them with a wave. They clambered up a small ridge, and there they found a grim sight, a shallow depression in the snow where it seemed men had bedded down. The remains of a small fire lay buried in ice. Nearby, they discovered a single glove stiffened by the cold, stained with a rusty patch of blood. Marley's face tightened. "It's Tomrek's glove. He had that tear along the seam." Haley swore under his breath. They made camp here, then something happened. They spread out carefully, searching for more clues. Rogden pointed to faint footprints leading farther east. They followed them to a cluster of pines, where they discovered the body of a watchman half buried in snow. His black cloak had been torn at the shoulder, and his eyes stared sightlessly at the iron-gray sky. Ice crystals clung to his beard. Cersei's stomach twisted at the starkness of death out here in the wilderness. She knelt beside him, gently brushing the snow from his face. She recognized him, Burton, a young recruit who had come only a month ago, eager to prove himself. Haley's laid a hand on her shoulder, urging her to rise. "We can't stay here," he said softly. "We'll mark the spot and come back to bury him later." Sierra and Rogden discovered more tracks leading deeper into the forest. The group pressed on, though the wind whipped even fiercer, stinging exposed skin. They clutched at branches to steady themselves, listening to the groan of trunks bending under heavy snow. Soon they found a second body, slumped behind a fallen log riddled with arrows. The arrows' fletchings were crude, possibly wildling made. Cersei swallowed hard. "Outlaws," she murmured. "Some group that never made peace?" Marley knelt to examine the shafts. "Looks like it. But why would they attack a watch patrol?" Haley's mouth tightened into a grim line. "For supplies or out of old hatred? Could be any reason. We need to see if there are any survivors." They followed a bloody trail that led them in circles until they came upon signs of a skirmish, a patch of churned snow, footprints overlapping broken branches. Scraps of black cloth clung to a pine's lower bough. Then, as they rounded a small copse, they found two more watchers lying side by side, both dead from arrow wounds and shallow slashes across their torsos. The fifth, Tomrek, was nowhere in sight. Haley's let out a low curse, kneeling by one body. "It's Ben. He was a father of two before he joined. Gods damn it." He closed the man's eyes with a trembling hand, then stood. "We can't search much longer in this storm." Cersei's breath came in quick puffs. She stared at the scene, anger and grief twisting inside her. She had come to respect these men. They were not nameless pawns, but individuals trying to start anew. "Tomrek might still be alive," she said, voice strained. "Or he might be a prisoner." Haley's nodded, though his expression was bleak. "We give it another half hour, then we head back. Royce doesn't want us lost too." They split into two pairs, searching the perimeter. Cersei and Marley trudged north, scanning every drift and hollow. Snow clung to Cersei's lashes, and she had to blink repeatedly to keep her vision clear. At times, she thought she saw movement in the white haze, a fleeting shadow among the pines. She gestured to Marley, and they pressed forward, senses alert. Another arrow lay on the ground, half buried, the tip stained. She crouched to pick it up, turning it over in her gloved hand. Crude indeed. She had seen better craftsmanship among peasants. But that only confirmed that outlaws had attacked. A soft moan caught her attention. She froze, raising a hand for silence. Marley held her breath. From somewhere ahead came a faint, ragged sound. They advanced cautiously, parting the branches. There, leaning against a tree trunk, was Tomrek. Blood matted his hair, and an arrow protruded from his thigh. He was barely conscious. Snow piled around him. Cersei's chest lurched. She rushed to his side, dropping to her knees. "Tomrek," she said, gently tapping his cheek. "Stay with us." His eyelids fluttered. He gazed up at her with half-lidded eyes. "F found the sea cache," he slurred, spitting out a frosty breath. "B-bay bastards ambushed us." Marley examined his wound. "He's alive, but we need to get him back at once." Cersei nodded, adrenaline surging. She fumbled in her pack for bandages and pressed them around the arrow's entry point. Tomrek let out a hiss of pain, but he was too weak to struggle. His skin felt like ice, and his lips were blue. "We'll carry him," she said. "Here, help me lift." A whistle cut through the air. Cersei instinctively ducked, shielding Tomrek with her body as an arrow thudded into the tree trunk overhead. Marley yelped, drawing her short sword. Another arrow streaked by, missing them by a foot. Heart hammering. Cersei looked around for cover. They had little besides the pines, and the falling snow gave their assailants perfect concealment. A shape loomed to their left, a man in ragged furs, not wearing black. In the split second she saw him raise a crude bow, Cersei snatched the dagger at her belt and threw it with desperate force. She felt a jolt of satisfaction as it struck him in the shoulder, causing him to stagger. Then Marley lunged at him, blade flashing, and his cry was cut short. Cersei heard a rustle behind her. She spun just in time to see another wildling-like figure rush forward with a stone-headed axe. He swung wildly, and she twisted aside, though the blade caught a piece of her cloak. She stumbled, her foot sinking into a snowdrift. He roared, raising the axe again. Before he could bring it down, a throwing knife whistled through the air from behind and buried itself in his back. He collapsed face first into the snow. Halys and the others had arrived. The forest erupted in a brief melee. 2 more outlaws, likely the same group who had ambushed Tomrek's patrol, emerged from behind trees, howling in anger. Rogden ducked under one's clumsy swing and hamstrung him with a swift slash. Halys parried another wildling's club with his longsword, forcing the man off balance, then drove his blade into the man's gut. It was over in less than a minute, the outlaws lying still in the drifts, their blood staining the snow. Panting, Cersei looked around, heart racing. She saw no more attackers. Marley checked the fallen men to ensure none played possum. Halys knelt beside Tomrek, pressing a hand to his wound. He's still breathing, gods be thanked. Sarah wiped her blade clean on the snow. We need to move fast. More outlaws might be nearby. They quickly improvised a stretcher from fallen branches and cloaks, bundling Tomrek as gently as they could. He moaned once, then slipped into unconsciousness. With Halys and Rogden carrying the makeshift litter, they began the slow, treacherous journey back to Castle Black. Cersei and the others formed a loose perimeter around them, swords and daggers at the ready, eyes scanning the swirling white for any further threats. By the time they approached the gates, the daylight had faded. Snow caked their clothes, and exhaustion weighed on every step. The watchers on the battlements hurried to let them in. Stable hands came running, along with 2 black sisters who doubled as medics. Carefully, Tomrek was lifted and rushed to the infirmary. Cersei's arms and legs trembled from the cold and fatigue. She forced herself to follow, concern for Tomrek eclipsing her own discomfort. The infirmary was a cramped hall with cots lining both walls. A brazier glowed in the corner, offering precious warmth. One of the medics, Sister Alwina, peeled back Tomrek's wet furs to examine the arrow wound. Cersei stood by, numbly watching as Alwina cut away the cloth and cleansed the area. Tomrek's skin was grayish, his breath shallow. We'll have to remove the arrow, Alwina murmured. It's going to be painful. He may not survive if the bleeding is too great. Marley squeezed Cersei's shoulder. You did all you could out there. Cersei nodded stiffly, not trusting herself to speak. She remembered Tomrek's friendly grin at mealtimes, the jokes he'd cracked to lighten the mood. Now that same man hovered on the brink of death, his lifeblood seeping from a savage wound. All because of a band of outlaws who refused to let old grudges die. The medics worked tirelessly, and Cersei stood vigil. Halys eventually left to report to Royce, but Cersei lingered, ignoring the cold sweat that clung to her skin. At one point, Sister Alwina asked her to hold a lantern closer so she could see the wound in better light. She complied, forcing her gaze to remain steady as Alwina probed for the arrowhead. Tomrek regained consciousness briefly, thrashing in pain. They had no milk of the poppy to ease his agony. Supplies were scarce, so they had to restrain him while Alwina did her brutal work. His screams filled the infirmary, echoing off the stone walls. Cersei gritted her teeth, feeling each of his screams like a knife in her chest. She had lived a life of cruelty and opulence, but this immediate personal suffering was harder to bear than she'd expected. She wanted to look away, to shut her eyes, but she forced herself to stay, to witness what the Watch endured every day. Eventually, Alwina extracted the arrowhead coated in dark blood. She and her assistant cauterized the wound, the stench of burning flesh clawing at Cersei's nostrils. Tomrek fell unconscious again. Alwina bandaged his leg and swathed him in blankets. He might live, she said quietly, face pale with strain. But infection is the real danger. Cersei set the lantern aside, her heart pounding. We have some medicinal herbs from the shipments, don't we? She asked, her voice husky. Alwina nodded. Not many, but I'll use what we have. Cersei let out a shuddering breath, thanked Alwina, and staggered out of the infirmary. Exhaustion pressed on her, but she forced her feet to carry her to Royce's quarters. She found him seated at his desk, Halys standing before him, finishing a report. Royce dismissed Halys with a nod, then looked to Cersei. You found Tomrek? She slumped into the chair opposite his desk, suddenly aware of how battered she felt. He's alive, barely. Royce released a breath. He's some good news. What of the others? Cersei's throat tightened. They're all dead, murdered by outlaws. We had a brief fight, killed a handful, but who knows how many more lurk out there. The Lord Commander's shoulders sagged. Damn, Tomrek was a good man. If he pulls through, he'll have a rough recovery. She nodded, rubbing a hand across her face. The memory of Tomrek's scream still rang in her ears. We found them too late. Royce's expression was heavy. These are the realities we face, and they're not new to you, I know. But it never gets easier, losing our own. Rest now. You've done enough. She rose to her feet, weariness making every muscle protest. At the door, she paused. Commander, we need to do something about these outlaws. If they keep prowling, we'll lose more men. He nodded grimly. I'll send out a larger force once this storm eases. We can't leave them unchallenged. Too drained for further discussion, she left. The corridors seemed to twist in the flickering torchlight. When she reached her own chamber, she sank onto the bed without removing her boots, letting her eyelids droop. The day's horrors played behind her closed eyes, the stiff bodies in the snow, the desperate fight, Tomrek's moans. She pressed her face into the pillow and tried to still her thoughts, but a bitter swirl of them plagued her all night. The next day dawned with a break in the clouds, sunlight piercing the gloom like a fragile promise. Yet the cold remained fierce, and the snow lay thick in the courtyard. Cersei woke with a dull ache in her limbs, but she rose, determined to see if Tomrek had survived the night. She made her way to the infirmary. A hush greeted her. Only a handful of watchers loitered near the cots, some with minor injuries. In the far corner, Tomrek lay still, his bandaged leg propped on a rolled blanket. She approached quietly, dread knotting her stomach. Sister Alwena looked up from where she was measuring a spoonful of herbs. He's breathing, albeit shallowly, she said. Fever set in. We've given him what we can, but all we can do is wait. Cersei swallowed. May I sit with him? Alwena nodded, moving aside. Cersei lowered herself onto a stool, feeling oddly uncertain. She had never been the nurturing type, not even with her own children. She had loved them fiercely, yes, but rarely had she tended them when they were ill. That had always been the maester's or the nurse's job. Now, she found herself in a role she didn't know how to fill. She watched Tomrek's face, the sweat beading on his brow despite the cold. His breath rasped in and out. She dipped a cloth into a bowl of water Alwena had placed beside the cot, then gently pressed it to Tomrek's forehead, wiping away the sweat. His eyelids fluttered, but he didn't fully wake. The fever burned hot against her hand. Time lost its meaning as she sat, occasionally refreshing the cloth, listening to the hush of the infirmary. Once, Alwena came by to tip a small amount of herbal tincture between Tomrek's lips. He coughed, sputtered, then fell silent again. Cersei thought about how easily she had dispensed cruelty and orders in King's Landing, never truly bearing witness to the raw aftermath. Here, in the Watch, everything was laid bare. The agony, the desperation, the thin line between life and death. She was no stranger to death, but it usually came wrapped in politics or war. This was more intimate. Eventually, Marley arrived, quietly standing beside Cersei. Any change? Cersei shook her head. No, he's clinging to life. Marley pressed her lips together. He's strong. Maybe that will see him through. Nay. Aye. Cersei merely nodded, eyes on Tomrek's pallid face. After a moment, Marley touched her shoulder. Lord Commander wants you to meet with him. I can sit here. Reluctantly, Cersei handed Marley the damp cloth and left the infirmary. She found Royce in the same war council chamber along with Halys Varley and Maester Arliss. They looked at her soberly as she entered. What is it? She asked, apprehension coiling in her stomach. Royce gestured for her to take a seat. More news from Eastwatch. The Bravo Sea vessel that diverted south apparently docked at a small cove, unloading cargo for unknown parties. We suspect Baelish is involved. Meanwhile, we've had no shipments from him in a fortnight. Our storehouses are running low again. Oh. Her jaw tightened. So he's cutting us off, or at least delaying? Maybe we're no longer his priority. Arliss rubbed his balding head. The realm's in turmoil, so new factions may be paying him more. Perhaps he thinks we've served our purpose. Varley growled low in his throat. We can't let that weasel starve us out. Royce lifted a hand. We might have to find another sponsor, or figure out a more legitimate channel for supplies, but that's not our only problem. There's an ominous rumor from the south. The Crown, one of its many claimants, considers the Watch's new neutrality questionable. Some suspect us of siding with certain houses. That might make future shipments even harder. Cersei felt a swirl of frustration. They had played Baelish's game, and now they were cornered by his shifting loyalties. We could try to approach another power, maybe the Northern Lords, or even a free city. But would that provoke Baelish into punishing us? Whoa. Hayla's face darkened. We owe him nothing. If he's abandoned us, we should do the same to him. Royce sighed. True enough, but we can't pretend he doesn't have influence. If he spreads word that the Night's Watch has become a tool of southern politics, more lords might withdraw their support. The new recruits from the jails might stop flowing. We could find ourselves friendless in a matter of months. The group fell into tense silence. Finally, Arliss spoke. We might need a direct approach. Someone should go speak with Baelish in person. Clarify whether our arrangement still stands, or if we should part ways. That's risky, but it might give us answers. No, Royce frowned. Travel south in this weather. Baelish could be anywhere. Cersei surprised herself by speaking up. He might still linger in White Harbor or near the Neck. He had agents in the area, if I volunteered to go. No, Hallease cut in, shaking his head. That's too dangerous. You're recognized as a Lannister. If any of the Southern Lords see you outside the Black, they might arrest you on sight. She drew a breath. I'd be wearing black, not armor and Lannister sigils. Besides, they think I'm either dead or locked away for life. They wouldn't expect me to wander the realm. And who else could negotiate with Baelish? He won't give a second glance to most watchers. Varley grumbled. He might slit your throat the moment you meet. Cersei allowed a faint smirk. He won't. He sees me as a fellow schemer. I suspect he'd like to gloat or talk. But look, I'm not saying I should leave tomorrow. Let's wait for a break in the weather, and let's do more scouting to see if we can locate him first. If we can't find him, we'll devise another plan. But if we do, this might be our best chance to salvage something. Nah. Royce regarded her with a complicated expression. At last, he said, I don't like it, but you're right that we have limited options. We'll consider it. If the storm breaks and we can spare a few watchers to accompany you, perhaps you'll go. But I won't force you. This would be volunteer only. She nodded. I understand. I'll think it over. With that, the meeting ended. Cersei returned to the infirmary for a while, finding Tomrex still unconscious, his fever unrelenting. She wondered if he would live to see the outcome of her negotiations, if indeed she embarked on such a journey. The notion of traveling south again filled her with conflicting emotions. Dread at returning to the realm she had been exiled from, curiosity at how much it might have changed, fear of being recognized and executed. Yet the Watch's survival might hinge on forging new alliances. If Baelish had truly abandoned them, they needed to know, and if he hadn't, they needed to secure a better arrangement. The threat of internal war in the south loomed again, and a starving or weakened Night's Watch would be ill-prepared to handle any fresh crisis that drifted northward. In the days that followed, the storm lingered, though it lost some of its fury. Tomrex's condition worsened. Cersei sat with him for hours each morning, wiping his brow, coaxing him to sip water when he briefly stirred. Marley or Alwina would take over at times, letting Cersei rest or tend to her other duties. Still, the color slowly drained from Tomrex's face as the fever ravaged him. One evening, while she was dozing on the stool beside his cot, she felt a sudden shift. His breathing changed, growing irregular. She jolted awake, calling for Alwina. But by the time the medic arrived, Tomrex's chest had stilled. Cersei felt an ache hollow her chest. She pressed a trembling hand to his shoulder, feeling the warmth of fever fade rapidly. The watchers in the infirmary lowered their heads, some whispering quick prayers. Alwina quietly pulled a blanket over his face, then led Cersei away. You did all you could, she said gently. The infection was too strong. He's at peace now. No. Cersei just stood there, staring at the shrouded form. She recalled the countless times she had seen death in the Red Keep. Enemies, strangers, even her own children. Each loss had scarred her differently. But this was the first time she had watched death take someone she'd tried so hard to save. A swirl of anger, guilt, and sorrow tore through her. She turned and walked out without a word. She found herself in the courtyard, the wind biting at her face. A handful of watchers were on patrol, and they cast curious glances her way. She walked to a corner where the snow had been trampled hard and leaned against the stone wall, breathing raggedly. She expected tears, but none came. Only a numbness, an emptiness where regret and anger churned. Memories flitted through her mind. Tomric joking about the watery ale, patting her on the shoulder after a successful training session, offering a shy smile when she'd praised his archery. Now he lay still and cold, another casualty of a savage land and savage men. She told herself that this was the cost of living at the wall. The Night's Watch had always known loss. Yet that didn't ease the weight pressing on her chest. Not knowing what else to do, she forced her legs to move. She stomped through the slush, heading to the stables, where the glow of lanterns indicated that someone was working. If she could just keep busy, maybe the numbness wouldn't consume her. Inside, the smell of hay and manure was oddly comforting. A stable hand brushed one of the horses. Another watched new recruits help muck out stalls. The animals stamped and snorted, tails swishing. Cersei found an unoccupied corner, took up a pitchfork, and began helping shovel soiled straw. The repetitive action offered a strange solace, something physical and immediate to focus on, rather than the swirl in her mind. Time blurred. She became vaguely aware of watchers coming and going, the stable hand giving instructions, the horses shifting in their stalls. Eventually, a voice drew her from her dull trance. "Hallis, you're going to ruin your back if you keep at that," he said, resting a hand on her pitchfork. "What are you doing?" She straightened, sweat beading her temple despite the cold. Mucking out stalls, the stable hand needed help. He studied her face, eyes narrowed. "Tomric." She exhaled shakily, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "He's gone." Haley swore under his breath, then nodded once. "Sorry, he was a fine ranger." Cersei set the pitchfork aside, leaning against the stable wall. "We tried so hard." "Yes," he said quietly. "Sometimes that's all we can do." They fell silent for a moment, listening to a horse paw at the ground. Then Hallis cleared his throat. "Royce wants to speak to you. Something about scouting a route south." She closed her eyes. "So soon? The storm is easing. If you mean to go, this might be your only window for a while. Another front could roll in any day." "Now, fall." She felt a surge of conflicting emotions, dread at the journey, but also a fierce desire to do something that mattered, to keep more watchers from dying needlessly. "All right," she said. "I'll see him." She handed the pitchfork to a new recruit who had just ambled in, then left the stables with Haley's. The afternoon sky was pale, the light strangely diffuse, casting the courtyard in a bluish tint. She wondered how many funerals the watch would have before winter's end. In this land, even the ground was often too frozen to dig proper graves, so they resorted to burning their dead. Royce was in the courtyard, speaking to Varley and a few others near the archery butts. When he saw Cersei, he dismissed them with a curt gesture and beckoned her closer. "Haley's told you." She nodded. "You want me to go south?" His eyes were full of concern. "Only if you're certain. I've asked for volunteers to accompany you, but so far only a handful are even willing. Word of outlaws and winter storms keeps most watchers from traveling. But Haley says he'll go. Marley might as well." "No." Cersei glanced at Hallis, who gave a small nod. She felt gratitude toward him, though she knew it was a dangerous undertaking. "Where would we head first?" Royce gestured toward the gate. "Down the King's Road or what's left of it. The neck is a quagmire in winter, but you might find a passable route. Once you reach White Harbor, you discreetly inquire after Baelish's whereabouts. If he's not there, see if you can find any of his contacts." "White Harbor is a big city," she said. "Plenty of eyes. I'll have to be careful not to be recognized." He nodded. "You'll travel as a small group, hopefully drawing less attention. Wear plain black cloaks, no insignias. If you think there's a safe contact who might speak on Baelish's behalf, approach them. If all else fails, you can turn back or keep going. But I'd rather not risk your lives too far south. Cersei mulled it over. In a way, burying herself in this mission might be easier than staying at Castle Black and dwelling on Tomrek's death. I'll go, she said at last. Royce looked at her with a mixture of relief and apprehension. Very well. I'll help you gather provisions. It's a gamble, but I see no better choice. We either find out where Baelish stands or seek alternate alliances. Our supplies are too low to wait out the rest of winter with crossed fingers. Noir Professor. Over the next 2 days, preparations were made. Cersei, Hallis, Marley, and 2 others, Rogden and Sarah, were chosen for the journey. All were relatively experienced in harsh travel, though none relished the idea. Lord Commander Royce personally parceled out enough rations and gear to last them several weeks, plus a small purse of coin gleaned from the watch's meager treasury. They each carried a weapon or 2, cloaks lined with fur, and as many layers as they could don without hindering movement. Before they departed, the watch held a brief funeral for Tomrek and the other fallen rangers, burning their bodies on a pyre behind the keep. Cersei stood with Hallis and Marley, watching the flames lick at the pale sky. A hush fell over the gathered watchers. No grand eulogy was offered, only a solemn promise that their brothers and sisters' watch had ended. Cersei felt the heat on her face, the sting of smoke in her eyes, and beneath that, the numb ache of finality. Then the funeral ended, and life at Castle Black marched on, as it always did. Early the next morning, the small company assembled at the main gate. Royce was there, along with a handful of watchers who had come to see them off. Gareth gave them a last distribution of rations. Hardtack, dried meat, a precious flask of strong spirits for warmth. Maester Arles pressed a small packet of medicinal herbs into Cersei's hand, murmuring that it might fend off infection if they were wounded. She thanked him quietly. Royce regarded each of them in turn. May the gods watch over you. If all goes well, return with news, or with Baelish himself if he's fool enough to travel north again. Wow. Hallis smirked grimly. We'll do what we can, Commander. The portcullis cranked upward with a groan. A swirl of frigid wind and drifting snow greeted them. One by one they passed beneath the gate and out onto the King's Road. The snow stretched in every direction, dotted by the stark silhouettes of leafless trees. The sky looked vast and empty, tinged with the faint pink of sunrise. Cersei took a steadying breath, glancing over her shoulder at Castle Black's towering walls of ice. Once, she had walked these grounds as a prisoner, forcibly turned into a watcher for life. Now, she ventured south on a mission that might change the fate of the entire watch. The irony did not escape her. In another life she would have commanded courtiers and guards to do her bidding. But that life was gone, swept away like footprints in the snow. They set forth, horses plodding through the drifts. The wind teased at Cersei's hood, tugging locks of her hair free. She glanced at Hallis riding beside her, his jaw set in determination, and at Marley just behind him, scanning the horizon with watchful eyes. Rogden and Sira rode in the rear, ensuring no one trailed them unawares. For now, the road was empty, but she knew that beyond these gentle hills lay a realm full of strife and cunning. She steeled herself for whatever lay ahead. For 3 days the journey was bleak but uneventful. They navigated snow-laden tracks where the King's Road was little more than a memory. Occasionally, they passed abandoned farmsteads, roofs caved in by winter's weight. They scavenged what they could, an old iron pot, a bit of firewood, but found no sign of recent habitation. Each night, they made camp in a sheltered copse or the lee of a broken wall, huddling together for warmth while the wind howled. Conversation was minimal, a quiet camaraderie forged by shared hardship. On the 4th day, the sky brightened, and they rode under a sun that gleamed off the snow, blinding them if they didn't lower their hoods. The air was still deathly cold, but the respite from storms lifted their spirits a fraction. That afternoon, they encountered the first true sign of life, a pair of villagers trudging north, pulling a small sled loaded with furs. The pair startled at the sight of watchers on horseback, but after a quick exchange of pleasantries they relaxed enough to answer a few questions. We hail from the outskirts of White Harbor, one said, a haggard man with a frostbitten ear. Cities in turmoil, Some lord or other is trying to claim it. We left to sell furs up north, but I doubt we'll get far in this snow. Marley leaned forward in her saddle. Which lord? The villager shrugged. I don't know his name. Heard rumors House Manderley is fighting off upstarts, but I don't get involved in politics, just trying to survive. Haley's offered them a few coins for any recent news of traveling lords or ships. The villagers obliged, though their information was sparse. They'd seen a few sellswords roving near a burned hamlet. They heard talk that smugglers regularly slipped in and out of the White Knife. Nothing about Baelish specifically, but they did mention a sly fellow who might have worn a mockingbird pin, seen in a tavern a week or two prior. Cersei's pulse quickened at that mention. Did he say where he was headed? She asked. The second villager, an older woman, furrowed her brow. Said something about heading south, maybe to the twins. Couldn't be sure. I only overheard him talking to a man who paid for ale with a golden dragon coin. They thanked the villagers and rode on, pondering this clue. The twins were far to the south, across the neck. If Baelish was indeed traveling, they might intercept him in White Harbor or somewhere along the route. Haley's pointed out they could also run into a dead end. But it was the best lead they had. That evening they found shelter in a derelict watchtower perched on a low rise. The roof had partially caved in, but stone walls blocked the wind enough for them to make a fire. As they huddled around the flames, roasting strips of dried meat, Cersei gazed at the swirling embers and thought about the distance they still had to cover. White Harbor was not close, and every day of travel exposed them to outlaws, beasts, and the risk of more storms. Marley sat across from her, munching quietly. After a time, she spoke. Are you all right? You've been quieter than usual. Less soon way. Cersei offered a faint shrug. Just thinking about the days ahead, and about Tomric. Marley lowered her gaze. I miss him too. He was decent company. They lapsed into silence. Haley's added a log to the fire. Sparks crackled, illuminating the cracks in the watchtower's walls. Eventually they bedded down, each wrapping themselves in furs. Cersei lay awake for a long while, listening to the wind whistle through the broken roof. Memories of King's Landing drifted through her head, reminding her of the woman she once was, hungry for power, guided by ambition and pride. Yet she found that version of herself difficult to reconcile with who she was now, curled on the cold ground with a handful of watchers who had become her makeshift family. She wondered if there was redemption in that, or if she even cared about redemption anymore so long as they survived. Morning came with a pale pink sky and a biting chill. They left the watchtower behind and continued south, gradually encountering more signs of civilization. Frozen fields, occasional footprints, and once a distant farmstead with smoke curling from its chimney. Still, they kept their distance, wary of strangers who might be desperate enough to rob or kill. On the 7th day of travel they reached a broad stretch of land where the trees thinned and rolling plains spread under the snow. Marley scouted ahead, returning at midday with news of a hamlet a few miles off the road. They decided to risk it, hoping to buy feed for their horses and perhaps glean more information. The hamlet was small, a cluster of huts and a single inn whose sign had faded beyond recognition. The villagers eyed them warily from doorways. Haley's greeted them with disarming politeness, and after some hesitation, a brawny man agreed to stable their horses for a few coins. The inn was cramped and smelled of unwashed bodies, but at least it offered a roof and a week's stew. They crowded around a splintered table, ignoring the curious stares of the locals. As they ate, the innkeeper's wife brought a pitcher of ale. Haley's offered her a copper star. We're searching for a man rumored to be heading south, possibly passing near White Harbor. Might wear a mockingbird pin or travel with a small retinue. The woman considered. Haven't seen anyone like that, but rumor says a fancy fellow with a cunning smile stayed in a bigger town east of here last week. He left before dawn and didn't pay his tab in full. Cersei perked up. Which town? Name's Brookhaven, the woman said, wiping her hands on her apron. 2 days east if you can handle the roads. Might be worth asking around there. Marley glanced at Cersei and Haley's. We could divert. Haley's pursed his lips. It's away from White Harbor, but the tip might be solid. Cersei nodded. We'll try Brookhaven. If that leads nowhere, we'll circle back toward White Harbor. They finished their sparse meal, thanked the innkeeper, and stepped out into the hamlet's muddy lane. A few villagers loitered, children peeking around corners at the watchers in black cloaks. One older woman spat on the ground when she noticed the sign of the Night's Watch, but Haley's motioned for the group to ignore it. They retrieved their horses and left the hamlet behind, turning east on a barely visible track through the snow-laden fields. As dusk approached, they found themselves in open countryside again. The wind picked up, blowing stray flakes across the land. Cersei's cheeks burned, and she could barely feel her fingers on the reins. Haley's pointed to a clump of trees in the distance, where they might camp out of the wind. They made for it, pushing the horses to keep moving before the temperature dropped further. At the tree line they discovered a wide stream, partially frozen. The water gurgled beneath a crust of ice. They dismounted carefully. Robden scouted a spot where the ground rose slightly, providing a small clearing for a fire. Each of them set about chores with practiced efficiency, collecting kindling, watering the horses, checking gear. Sarah, who had a knack for foraging, found a few edible winter roots near the bank. They roasted them alongside strips of dried venison, the warmth of the fire a precious comfort. After they ate, they organized the watch schedule for the night. Halys took the first shift, perched on a fallen log with his sword across his knees, scanning the darkness. Cersei was to follow him halfway through the night. The others rolled themselves in blankets, trying to catch any scrap of sleep. Cersei dozed off to the crackle of flames, images of Baelish's mocking grin drifting in her mind. She dreamt of the Red Keep again, of a hidden passage behind the walls where she'd once whispered conspiracies to Jaime, or threatened Tyrion. In the dream, the passages were filled with swirling snow, and Baelish's voice echoed saying, "Still playing the game, my dear." She awoke to someone shaking her shoulder. Halys, his breath frosting in the moonlight. "Your turn." She rose, bleary-eyed, and took his place on the log. The fire burned low, reduced to embers. She tossed on a few sticks, coaxing it back to life. The night sky arched overhead, sprinkled with stars. Clouds skirted the horizon, threatening another snowfall. Her breath plumed with each exhale, and the hush of the wilderness pressed in. She listened for any sign of trouble. Footsteps, howls, the cracking of ice. The dark gave her too much time to think about how they might fail in this quest, about how Baelish might already be gone. She pictured Tom Reck's feverish face, the watchers they'd left behind, depending on her to secure some measure of stability. That weight felt almost unbearable. Suddenly, a noise pricked her ears. A subtle crunch in the snow, somewhere off to her left. She stiffened, hand moving to the dagger at her belt. Peering into the darkness, she saw only the pale silhouettes of trees. The horses shuffled, sensing something. She stood slowly, heart pounding, and took a few steps toward the edge of the clearing. Another crunch. Then silence. She beckoned Halys, who stirred awake at her gesture. He moved with silent caution. "What is it?" he mouthed. She pointed toward the trees. Together, they advanced, weapons ready. The moonlight was faint, casting uncertain shadows. A branch snapped, and they whirled to face a shape darting among the trunks. Halys hissed, "Who goes there?" No answer came. Cersei's pulse hammered. Could it be an outlaw scout? A wild beast? She motioned for Halys to circle around while she approached from the opposite side. Her footsteps pressed carefully into the snow, barely a sound. She glimpsed the shape again, a hunched figure, maybe child-sized, scampering away. She gave chase, weaving between the trees. The figure nearly slipped on a patch of ice but recovered, continuing deeper into the woods. Abruptly it turned, and by the moonlight she saw a young girl's face, gaunt with hunger, eyes wide with fright. She wore ragged furs and carried a small knife. She raised it in trembling hands when she saw Cersei approach. Cersei halted, raising her empty palms. The girl looked no older than 10 or 12, half-starved, with chapped lips and bruises on her arms. "We won't hurt you," Cersei said gently, though she wasn't sure the child believed her. "Are you alone?" The girl bared her teeth in a feral snarl. Behind them, Halys appeared, blade drawn, but lowered it slightly upon seeing the child. The girl glanced between them, poised like a cornered animal. Cersei took a slow step forward. "We have food. You can warm by our fire." The child stared at her, uncertain. Then hunger must have overwhelmed caution, because she took a trembling step forward and promptly collapsed to her knees, sobbing in broken gasps. Cersei moved quickly, kneeling to check if she was injured. She felt no wounds, only the painful jut of ribs under the furs. "Helios," she called softly. "Help me get her to camp." He hesitated, glancing around for any sign of an ambush. Seeing none, he returned to the clearing with Cersei. They woke Marley, who gathered blankets and coaxed the half-frozen child to the fire. The girl shivered violently, eyes darting at each of them. Cersei offered her a bit of dried meat. "What's your name?" "Arryn," she managed, swallowing the jerky with desperate hunger. "Where are your parents?" Marley asked quietly. The girl shook her head, tears cutting through the grime on her cheeks. "Gone. Left. Or died. I don't know." Her words tumbled out in a ragged whisper. "I ran away. Been running since." Anger flared in Cersei's gut. The realm's chaos had bred horrors for the weak and the young. She recalled how once she might have scoffed at the fate of peasants. Now, confronted with this terrified child, she felt a crushing sympathy. She gently rubbed Ryn's back, trying to calm her. "You're safe now," she said, though she knew they could hardly promise that. Still, she could at least offer her a meal and a place by the fire. Ryn devoured a chunk of bread, then sipped water from Marley's flask. She huddled in the blankets, her eyes drooping from exhaustion and relief. Soon enough she nodded off, curled like a lost animal seeking warmth. Cersei and the others exchanged glances, uncertain what to do. "We can't just leave her here," Helios muttered. Marley brushed a lock of hair from the girl's face. "Of course not. We can take her with us to Brookhaven, maybe find someone who'll look after her." Robden, roused by the commotion, sighed. "We can barely feed ourselves." Cersei shot him a sharp look. "We won't abandon her. We can spare a little food, enough to keep her alive until we reach some settlement." Robden grunted but didn't argue further. So the company gained an unexpected companion, a frightened girl with no past and no future, but the mercies of the Watchers who found her. For the remainder of the night, Cersei stood guard, letting Ryn sleep in the blankets. She found herself thinking about her own daughter, Myrcella, lost to the cruelty of politics. Though Ryn was no royal child, the vulnerability in her posture stirred old maternal instincts in Cersei's heart, instincts that she had believed smothered by grief and guilt. She felt a strange protectiveness blossom, and part of her wondered if she was clinging to any shred of redemption the gods would grant her. Dawn came in a haze of pink and gray. They packed their camp quickly, mindful of Ryn's presence. She seemed timid, but calmer than the night before. Marley offered her a spot on her horse, and though the girl was initially terrified, she eventually allowed herself to be lifted onto the saddle. They set off eastward again, moving at a steady pace across the snowy plains. The next few days blurred together. They traveled cautiously, sometimes hearing distant howls in the night that might have been wolves or wild dogs. They rationed their food, giving small portions to Ryn, ensuring she gained some strength back. Gradually she spoke more, revealing a patchwork history of neglect and abuse at the hands of various men who had used her for forced labor. She didn't mention the horrors in detail, but the Watchers needed little imagination to grasp what she had endured. Cersei felt her anger simmer with each new detail, hating how the realm's chaos exploited the powerless. On the 10th day since leaving Castle Black, they arrived at Brookhaven. It was a larger settlement than the hamlet they had visited before, boasting a small palisade, a few decent inns, and a central marketplace. The walls were lightly guarded, just two men in patched leather jerkins who eyed the black cloaks warily, but allowed them inside upon Hallis' courteous greeting. The air smelled of cooking fires and horses, and though snow blanketed the streets, the bustle of townsfolk suggested a faint prosperity here. Or perhaps it was just relief that they had enough resources to endure winter. They stabled their horses at a rundown stable, paying a few coins to the stablemaster who looked at them askance. Then they decided to split up. Helios and Robden would inquire about Baelish at the main inn, while Cersei, Marley, and Sira checked another tavern near the market. Ryn insisted on staying with Cersei, clinging to her side. They had no reason to force the girl away, so she tagged along, wide-eyed at the unfamiliar sights and sounds of a semi-thriving town. The tavern was a noisy, smoky place, its patrons a mix of locals, travelers, and a few grizzled mercenaries who eyed newcomers with suspicion. Cersei pulled her hood low to avoid drawing attention. She approached the barkeep, a stout woman in a stained apron. "We're looking for a man rumored to have passed through recently," Cersei said quietly. Small in stature, cunning eyes, possibly wearing a mockingbird pin. The barkeep wiped a mug, her gaze flicking from Cersei to Marley and Sarah. Might have. We get many travelers. Why do you ask? Cersei slid a silver stag across the bar. We'd like to find him. The barkeep pocketed the coin, glancing around as if checking for eavesdroppers. A man fitting that description was here about 5 nights ago. Didn't stay long, ordered wine, asked some questions about the road south. Paid his tab in gold. Or a sly grin I didn't care for. One of my barmaids said he'd inquired about caravans traveling through the neck. Now a fair. Marley leaned in. Did he say where he was headed? The barkeep shrugged. Told her he was riding for Harrion's Cross east of here, but he could have lied. Folk like him often do. Cersei nodded. Thank you. She left another coin, partly for the barkeep's trouble, and partly to ensure she wouldn't spread word of watchers looking for a certain cunning man. They turned away, weaving through the crowded room. A few men tried to catch their attention, no doubt curious or worse, but Marley fixed them with a cold glare. They slipped out into the crisp daylight, Rin clutching Cersei's cloak. So he was here, Sarah said softly. At least we're on the right track. Cersei looked around the market, where a few stalls sold root vegetables, salted fish, and meager winter wares. We might try asking around here as well. The more we learn, the better. If Baelish truly went east, we'll follow. Marley nodded. I'll circle the stalls. Maybe I'll get lucky and find someone who recognized him. She strode off, leaving Cersei and Sarah with Rin in the middle of the bustling square. The girl shrank closer to Cersei, wary of the crowds. Cersei patted her shoulder. Stay close, she murmured. Together they walked among the stalls, eavesdropping on conversations. Here and there, Cersei asked subtle questions. Had anyone seen a man with a mockingbird pin, or heard gossip of travelers paying in gold? Many had seen nothing. One old fishmonger claimed to have sold a dried cod to a flashy man in a fancy cloak, but the description didn't quite match. Another recognized the mockingbird sigil but said the man left in a hurry, speaking with some mercenaries. After nearly an hour of searching, they regrouped with Marley and found Haley's and Rogden approaching from the other side of the square. The innkeep confirmed the same story, Haley said, breath steaming. Baelish was here, left for Harrion's Cross with 2 bodyguards. That was 5 days ago. Rogden frowned. If he's moving that quickly, we might never catch him. Perhaps, Cersei said, but we can try. Harrion's Cross is only a day or 2 east if the roads are passable. She glanced at their surroundings. We should rest here for the night. Rin needs warm lodging, and so do the rest of us. Halleys agreed. They split the cost of 2 rooms at the second inn, Spartan but less noisy than the tavern they'd first entered. The proprietor, a thin man with watery eyes, accepted their coin without question. They settled Rin in a small side room, Marley volunteering to stay with her. Haley's, Rogden and Sarah took another. Cersei, as the lone extra, ended up securing a cramped nook near the fireplace where she could unroll a bedroll and at least have some warmth. That evening, they gathered in the small common area for a simple meal of barley soup and bread. Rin ate hungrily, color returning to her cheeks. Cersei watched her with a mixture of relief and sorrow. Relief that the girl was improving, sorrow that her future was so uncertain. A hush fell over their group as they reflected on the next leg of the journey. When they finished, Cersei lingered by the fire. Hades joined her, hands extended toward the flames. We're close on Baelish's heels. You think he's truly heading to the Twins? She gazed into the dancing light. Possibly. Or he's heading somewhere else in the Riverlands. Baelish always had ties there. He's cunning. We might not catch him if he doesn't want to be caught. Halleys nodded. True. But at least we know we're on the right trail. How far do we go? We can't chase him all the way to Dorne if he decides to vanish. She sighed. We'll keep going until it's hopeless, or until we find some other solution. Maybe if I speak with lords along the way, I can arrange something more reliable for the watch. We can't return empty-handed. Oh. He watched her thoughtfully. You really care about them, don't you? The watch. She felt a pang in her chest. They're my brothers and sisters now. I can't let them starve, or let the realm's chaos devour them. Haley smiled, a weary but genuine expression. It's strange. I never thought I'd respect a Lannister, let alone a former queen. But you've proven yourself. You don't give up no matter the odds. She managed a small smile in return. That's all I've ever known. The moment I give up, I'm lost. With that, they parted, Haley's heading to the shared room. Cersei sank onto her bedroll by the fireplace, her mind heavy with the day's discoveries. Somewhere out there, Baelish was weaving new webs of ambition. The Watch's survival might hinge on confronting him, or forging a new path altogether. She closed her eyes, letting the warmth of the fire lull her. A swirl of doubt, hope, and resolve mingled in her thoughts, until sleep finally claimed her. They rose before dawn, the sky still dark as they prepared to leave Brookhaven. The innkeeper gave them a brief farewell, clearly happy to see the black-cloaked strangers depart. They collected their horses from the stable, Rin perched on Marley's saddle once again. Snow fell in a thin drizzle, coating the narrow roads in a light dusting of white. At the eastern gate, the sleepy guards waved them through with barely a glance. Riding at a brisk pace, they followed the path toward Harrion's Cross. The day passed in a silent rhythm of hoofbeats and the crunch of snow. Occasional crows flew overhead, cawing in the still air. Rin dozed in the saddle, lulled by the motion. Haley's led, scanning the horizon for any sign of trouble, while Cersei kept her gaze on the surrounding countryside. She saw no tracks but their own, though once or twice they spotted distant shapes that might have been deer or wolves. Late in the afternoon, they crested a small hill, and below them lay a shallow valley dotted with leafless trees and a frozen creek. Smoke rose from a scattering of huts on the far side, presumably Harrion's Cross. A wooden bridge spanned the creek. Beyond that, a battered palisade enclosed the village's center. It was a modest settlement, perhaps slightly larger than Brookhaven, but not by much. They descended toward the bridge. A pair of tired-looking men, armed with spears, guarded it. They eyed the watchers warily. "State your business," one said. "We're travelers seeking lodging," Hallease replied smoothly. "Heard there's an inn here." The man spat to the side. "Hey, there's an inn, though I wouldn't call it grand. You'll find it near the market square. Just don't cause trouble. We've had enough of that from roving sellswards." They crossed, mindful of the ice-coated planks. On the other side, the main gate of the palisade stood open, revealing a cramped cluster of buildings. Villagers bustled about, carrying bundles of firewood or leading goats along the muddy streets. A few paused to stare at the watchers, then hurried on. Cersei noticed a tension in the air, unease etched into the faces of those who passed. She wondered if some local conflict brewed. They found the inn, a two-story structure with smoke curling from its chimney. Its sign read, "The Willow's Rest," though no willow trees were anywhere in sight. The stable out back was small but serviceable. They dismounted, stiff from hours in the saddle. After paying the stable hand a couple of coppers, they entered the inn, the warmth of the common room washing over them. The interior was dim, lit by a hearth and a few lanterns. A handful of patrons sat at rough tables, nursing drinks. The innkeeper, a portly man with a stained apron, approached. "Rooms?" he asked in a brusque tone. "Yes, if you have them," Cersei said, removing her gloves. "Also food, and a place for the girl to rest." The innkeeper squinted at Rin, who looked exhausted. "We've got a small side room. Might cost you extra?" "Nay." Hallease fished out a silver stag. "We'll take it." The innkeeper pocketed the coin. "Then be welcome. We've hot stew if you want it, and some ale. We've also got a traveler staying upstairs. Odd fellow, keeps to himself." Cersei's pulse quickened. "Odd how?" The innkeeper shrugged. "He paid in gold. Doesn't talk much. Has a mockingbird pin on his cloak, or so my wife said." Sarah let out a soft hiss of excitement. Hallease exchanged a glance with Cersei. She turned back to the innkeeper, keeping her voice calm. "We might wish to speak with him." The man spread his hands. "He's in the second room on the left. I doubt he'll appreciate visitors, but do as you like." They thanked the innkeeper, and Marley guided Rin to a corner table where they could sit by the fire. Hallease, Sarah, and Rogden huddled briefly with Cersei. "We found him," Hallease murmured. "Or so it seems. What now?" Cersei steadied her racing heart. "Let me go first. If Baelish is up there, I'll handle the conversation. He might flee if he thinks we've come for blood." Rogden frowned. "Shouldn't we all go in case he tries something?" She shook her head. "He's more likely to talk if I'm alone. If things go wrong, You'll hear the commotion. Nine, hurry. They nodded reluctantly. Cersei exhaled, calming her nerves. This was it, the moment they had trekked all this way for. Baelish, the man who had orchestrated so many intrigues, whose manipulations had once run parallel to her own. Now she had to convince him to resume an alliance or at least help them secure supplies for the Watch. Her heart pounded as she climbed the worn wooden stairs, each step creaking ominously. She reached the second floor, the corridor lit by a single lantern. The second door on the left stood closed. She paused outside, listening. A faint murmur of movement within. Gathering her courage, she rapped on the door with her knuckles. For a moment, nothing. Then a soft voice. Yes? She drew a breath. It's me. Her voice trembled slightly. Cersei? A pause. Then footsteps approached, and the door opened a crack. Baelish's face appeared, lit by the glow of a single candle behind him. His eyes widened slightly, then a slow, knowing smile curved his lips. My, he purred. The lioness in black. I wondered if you were still alive. She steeled herself. May I come in? He studied her face, then opened the door wide enough for her to enter. She slipped inside, noticing the small room contained a simple bed, a table with a half-eaten plate of food, and a bag near the foot of the bed. Baelish shut the door behind her, sliding the latch. He wore a dark cloak with a faint mockingbird pin at his collar, his attire neat despite the winter's hardships. Cersei, he said, letting her name linger. You look well considering the circumstances. The black rather suits you. She swallowed her retort. You've been avoiding Castle Black's needs, she said, wasting no time. Shipments have stopped. The Watch is on the brink again. Did you think we wouldn't notice that you've sold your loyalty elsewhere? He gave a light laugh, moving to lean against the table. I never sold anything, my dear. I merely provided a service. The realm is complicated these days. Many lords clamor for favors. My resources are not infinite. She stepped closer, fists clenched at her sides. We relied on you. Without the supplies, we might starve. Our arrangement was mutual benefit. He shrugged. And you benefited, didn't you? For quite some time. But the game changes. My attention shifted to more profitable ventures. I assumed the Night's Watch would find alternative means by now. Her anger spiked. You know how dire things are in the north. The Watch is hardly a profitable investment. But the threat of outlaws, wildlings, or worse remains. If the Watch crumbles, the realm will suffer. He arched an eyebrow. You speak of the realm's welfare as though it's your concern. My, how you've changed. Or is this merely an act? She glared at him. Believe what you will. I'm asking you. No, I'm demanding you honor our arrangement. The shipments must resume. We can sweeten the deal if needed. Oh. He laughed again, a soft, mocking sound. Demanding, are we? You forget who holds the power in this dynamic, Cersei. I am not the desperate one you are, but I'll hear your offer. What can you give me that outshines the other lords vying for my services? She forced down her rage. He had always been slippery, always dealing in half-truths. Information, she said curtly. The Watch has eyes along the wall, watchers traveling beyond it. We could keep you informed of any threats, any movements of wildlings or northern forces. We can even turn a blind eye to more of your smuggling routes if that's your wish. He tapped his chin, feigning deep thought. Tempting, but I also wonder if the crown, what remains of it, will soon unify. The last thing I want is to be caught aiding a rebellious garrison. Is the Watch truly neutral these days? Her voice trembled with frustration. We are. But we can't remain, so if you choke off our resources, we may be forced to find allies among your rivals. He smiled thinly. There it is, the threat of betrayal. I knew you still had claws, but I'm not certain you realize how many suitors I have, dear lioness. Providing grain to a handful of black-cloaked outcasts is hardly my top priority. She bristled at the insult. Then name your price. We traveled all this way to get an answer. He pushed off the table, moving closer until she caught a whiff of his perfumed soap. His voice turned low and smooth. The Night's Watch intrigues me. So many criminals and misfits forging a shared identity in the cold. Perhaps I'd like to see just how desperate they are. But if you want me to resume shipments, I need more than just your blind eye, more than scraps of information about wildlings. I want an oath that, should the Watch ever re-enter the realm's politics in force, they will side with the faction I designate. No half measures this time. If a new war flares, I want the Watch to stand behind my chosen allies. Nan. Her heart pounded. That's impossible. The Watch swears neutrality. We can't declare for any southern lord. He chuckled, an arrogant tilt of his head. You already broke neutrality when you let me smuggle goods. Don't feign innocence. The question is whether you'll break it further to survive. If you're not prepared to do that, then I bid you farewell, and may the winter be kind to you. Nah. She stared at him, fury and dread mingling in her veins. This was the cost. The Watch would become a pawn in Baelish's next grand play. She thought of Royce, of the vow they had tried so hard to preserve. Could she truly sacrifice it just to fill their storehouses? And yet, how many would die if the supplies didn't come? Don't ask for something we can't give, she said in a raw whisper. You'll doom hundreds of lives. He shrugged languidly. War is a messy business. I do hate to see you beg, though. Perhaps I might lighten my demand. A token show of loyalty then. When the time comes, a small garrison of watchers might join my cause, enough to tip a battle or secure a fortress. I leave the details flexible. She felt sick. I can't promise that. Lord Commander Royce wouldn't agree. Baelish's eyes glinted. Then you need to convince him. Or do you lack the influence you once claimed to have? He let the question hang, then added, I'll give you a fortnight to decide. After that, I'll sign an exclusive contract with certain lords in the Vale. Then the Watch will have no recourse. Najiwad. Her hands trembled with barely contained rage. She wanted to strangle him, to end his poisonous manipulations once and for all. But that would achieve nothing, except her own ruin. Instead, she drew a ragged breath, forcing herself to remain calm. We'll discuss it, but you must give us some supply shipments now, to survive until we reach a final arrangement. Show good faith if you want ours. He considered a moment, then dipped his head, ever the gracious merchant. I can send a small convoy north discreetly, enough to placate your immediate concerns. Consider it a gesture of goodwill. But if you fail me, or refuse my terms after that, don't expect any further charity. She nodded, struggling to keep her composure. So be it. He moved closer, his eyes searching hers. You know, seeing you like this, humbled, determined, I almost admire you, Cersei. Yet I wonder if, deep inside, you still relish the game. You always loved power. She drew back, revulsion curling in her stomach. That was another life. A slow smile played on his lips. Lives are rarely so cleanly separated, but I'll let you hold your illusions, now if that's all. She turned toward the door. We have nothing more to say. I'll inform the Lord Commander. She unlatched the door and left without another word, her blood pounding in her ears. She expected Baelish to call after her, but he remained silent. Only when she reached the corridor did she realize her hands were shaking. The conversation had felt like a viper coiling around her throat, forcing her to choose between slow strangulation or an even more painful betrayal of her oath. Downstairs, Haley's and the others noticed her pale face the moment she descended. They rose from the corner table, Rin peeking from behind Marley's cloak. Haley's asked softly, Well? She steadied her voice, aware of the other patrons. He'll send a small shipment north, but his price is higher now, much higher. Marley frowned. Meaning? Cersei gave a curt shake of her head. Not here. Let's find a private spot. They paid the innkeeper for a small side room, closing the door behind them. Inside, Cersei recounted Baelish's ultimatum. Outrage flared among the watchers, especially Rogden, who spat curses against Baelish's name. Marley's eyes darkened. He wants to drag the Watch into a southern war. That's unthinkable. Cersei rubbed her temples. Exactly. But what choice do we have? He's offering just enough supplies to keep us alive, with the threat that if we refuse, he'll side with another faction entirely. We'll be left starved and alone, and the realm's chaos will only grow. Haley's exhaled. We can't make this decision alone. We have to return to Castle Black. Let Royce decide. No. Cersei nodded, feeling an ache in her soul. He gave us 2 weeks. We'll have to hurry back with word. Either the Watch accepts Baelish's demands or we risk forging a different alliance, if one can even be found. I hate that it's come to this. They all looked at each other grimly. Rin gazed up with wide, confused eyes, unable to fully grasp the weight of their conversation. Marley rested a comforting hand on the girl's shoulder. So we go back, Marley said quietly. We tell the Lord Commander and we see if there's another path. Cersei suppressed a surge of despair. The path was narrowing, each step forced by the realm's harsh realities. She silently cursed Baelish, cursed the fractured crown, cursed the memory of the war that had led to this tangled mess. But she also felt a grim determination. She would see this through, no matter how agonizing the choices. The Watch depended on it. Thus, they prepared to leave Harrion's Cross at first light. Cersei half expected Baelish to vanish in the night, but Haelys kept discreet watch on the inn's exits. By dawn, Baelish was still in his room, though the innkeeper mentioned he planned to depart soon as well. Cersei wanted nothing more to do with him. She saddled her horse in silence, the others following suit. The sky hung low with heavy clouds, threatening another storm. With Rin mounted behind Marley, they rode out of the gates, turning north and west this time, aiming to retrace their route toward Brookhaven and eventually Castle Black. No one spoke much as they left Harrion's Cross behind. The wind blew stiffly across the plains, carrying flakes of snow that stung their faces. Cersei's thoughts churned. How would Royce react? Would he see any alternative to bending to Baelish's demands? If the Watch aligned with one faction in the next war, the vow of neutrality would be shattered beyond repair. And yet, starving or abandoning the realm's defenses seemed just as horrifying. They rode into the bitter day, hooves crunching on snow that had refrozen overnight. Rin clung to Marley, burying her face in the cloak when the gusts grew too strong. Sarah scouted ahead, and Haelys rode beside Cersei, occasionally casting her worried glances. She appreciated his silent support, though she couldn't bring herself to discuss the sense of dread gnawing at her. By midday, the temperature rose slightly, turning the snow to slush in places. The horses snorted with discomfort and progress slowed. They paused to water the animals at a half-frozen stream. Cersei knelt to refill her canteen, catching a glimpse of her reflection in the dark water. She barely recognized the gaunt, weathered face framed by short, ragged hair. She looked more like a hard-bitten ranger than a once powerful queen. Perhaps that was the price for forging a new path. Maybe it was a price worth paying. They continued traveling until dusk, when they found a small, abandoned farmstead where they could shelter in a barn. The roof was damaged, but it blocked most of the wind. Haelys and Rogden gathered wood to start a fire, while Marley arranged blankets for Rin. Sarah inspected the perimeter for any sign of brigands or wild animals. The routine felt grimly familiar, each of them falling into practiced roles. As Cersei laid out rations, she heard Marley humming softly, trying to soothe Rin. The girl had been quiet all day, shivering under her cloak. Cersei crouched beside them, offering Rin a small piece of dried apple. "We'll be home soon," she said, though the word home felt strange on her tongue. "Castle Black has a place for you if you want it." Rin stared with haunted eyes. "Cold there?" Cersei couldn't help a wry smile. "Very cold, but we have walls to keep out the worst of it, and you won't be alone." The girl chewed the apple slowly. "No one beats me?" Marley shook her head, fighting tears. "No one will beat you. We look out for each other." Rin nodded uncertainly as if she couldn't quite believe it. Cersei gently patted her shoulder, wondering if the walls of Castle Black would truly offer the refuge she promised, or if this child was doomed to find hardship wherever she went. Still, it was better than leaving her in the chaos of the South. After a brief meal, they settled to sleep. Cersei found it difficult to rest. She lay with her head on a rolled cloak, staring at the barn's rafters. Memories flooded her. Baelish's smirk, the malice in his eyes, the death of Tomrek, the vow she had taken. She clenched her jaw, hating how powerless she felt. In King's Landing, she had believed herself a master manipulator. Now, she found that real power lay not in cunning alone, but in the ability to protect others. That was a skill she had never fully mastered. Eventually, fatigue claimed her. She drifted off into uneasy dreams. At one point, she dreamed of Tyrion, standing on the wall with her, saying, Sometimes we must do what's necessary, sister, before he dissolved into blowing snow. She woke with a start, breath hitching, the barn still shrouded in darkness. Haley's on watch near the door met her gaze. She saw understanding there, a shared burden. She sighed, turning on her side, letting herself slip back into a fitful slumber. Morning dawned gray and cold. They set out once more, each day blending into the next as they navigated back toward Brookhaven. Snow fell intermittently, sometimes heavy, sometimes light, adding fresh layers to the already difficult paths. They encountered few travelers. Most sensible folks hunkered down for winter rather than braving the roads. Once, they spotted a small caravan of merchants slogging south with lumbering oxen. But the merchants kept their distance, eyeing the watchers warily. Rin's health improved a little with regular meals, though she often rode in silence, lost in her own thoughts. Each evening, Cersei or Marley would coax her to talk about her past, her favorite memories if any. Slowly, she revealed small glimpses, playing by a stream before her mother died, a kind neighbor who sometimes gave her bread. But most of her life had been a series of sorrows. Cersei tried not to let it weigh on her too heavily. She had enough burdens of her own. Yet each story pricked at her heart, making her regret the time she'd turned a blind eye to the realm's suffering. On the 6th day of their return journey, they reached Brookhaven again. The guards recognized them and waved them in, complaining of the unending cold. At the inn they had visited previously, the barkeep remembered them too, remarking that they were fortunate not to have frozen to death traveling in such weather. Haley's informed him they wouldn't stay long, just enough to rest and buy more supplies if available. While Haley's and Rogden negotiated for food, Cersei lingered in the corner of the inn's common room with Marley and Sierra. Rin sat at their feet, nibbling a crust of bread. The place was busier than before, filled with travelers seeking shelter. At a nearby table, a pair of cloaked men whispered intently, occasionally glancing around as if afraid of eavesdroppers. Sarah, always watchful, caught Cersei's eye and nodded toward them. Cersei leaned closer, straining to overhear. One man said, "The crown's in shambles. If the rumors are true, a new claimant is gathering forces in the Riverlands, possibly heading north for an alliance." The other replied, "Madness. The last thing we need is more fighting, but the lords won't settle until one of them sits firmly on the throne." Cersei felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. Another war stirring in the south, threatening to spill north. If Baelish had allied with one faction, he might drag the Watch into that conflict. She closed her eyes briefly, wondering if peace was a dream forever out of reach. They left Brookhaven that same afternoon, not wanting to waste precious time. The final stretch to Castle Black took another 5 days, made arduous by sporadic storms. Their rations dwindled, though they eked out just enough to keep going. Rin fell ill with a fever on the last day, coughing violently. Marley fretted over her as best she could, giving her sips of watered wine and the last of their herbs. Cersei prayed silently to whatever gods might be listening, pleading that the child not die after all they had done to keep her safe. Finally, after weeks away, the looming wall appeared on the horizon. The sight was both forbidding and oddly reassuring. Castle Black's dark silhouette clung to the base of the ice, smoke rising from its chimneys. Cersei felt relief swirl in her chest, remembering how far they had come, the countless dangers they had faced. Even the sight of that frigid fortress felt like a homecoming. They approached the gates at dusk. Watchmen rushed forward as the party emerged through the swirling snow, guiding them inside. Word spread quickly that Sister Lannister and her companions had returned, bearing news of Baelish. Lord Commander Royce strode out into the courtyard to greet them. His keen eyes took in Rin's feverish condition, and he barked orders for her to be brought to the infirmary. Marley carried the child inside, reassuring her in hushed tones. Cersei dismounted stiffly, swaying from exhaustion. Royce offered a steadying hand. "You look half dead, sister. Let's get you inside." She nodded weakly. "We have much to discuss," she rasped. Royce led them to his office. The warmth of the interior walls, a mercy. There, Haley's Rogden and Sarah recounted what had happened in broad strokes. Their route south, the sightings of Baelish, the final confrontation in Harrion's Cross. Cersei spoke of Baelish's demands, though her voice shook with residual anger. Royce listened in grim silence, his face pale in the flickering lamplight. "So," he said finally, "Baelish wants us to pledge ourselves to whatever faction he supports in the next war. In exchange, he'll resume shipments that keep us alive. Haley's nodded. He gave us 2 weeks to decide. Said he'd send a small shipment soon as a show of good faith, but beyond that, Royce's jaw tightened. This crosses every line of the Watch's vow. We exist to protect the realm, not to become pawns in a southern power struggle. Cersei inhaled shakily. If we refuse, we may starve, or if we survive winter by sheer luck, we could be even weaker come spring. Then we might not be able to stop the wildlings, outlaws, or any threat. The realm would suffer either way. Royce slammed a fist on the table, a rare show of emotion. Curse that spider. I see no easy path. Our storehouses are critically low. Garth's been rationing heavily. Many watchers go to bed hungry. Without fresh supplies, we'll lose more to starvation or desertion. Silence settled, heavy as a shroud. Rogden shifted uneasily. What if we approach the Northern Lords directly? Would they help? Royce's gaze flicked to him. We tried. They're strapped as well. And with the crown so fractured, few can afford to send generous shipments to the Watch. Also, some suspect we're compromised by smugglers. They might turn a blind eye to our plight. No. Haley's cursed under his breath. So Baelish is our best chance, or we let the Watch wither. That's no choice at all. Royce sank into his chair, elbows on the table, head in his hands. Cersei remembered the fatherly sorrow in his eyes. When they'd lost Tomric, the concern he showed every time a new recruit arrived half frozen. He wanted to preserve the Night's Watch, but at what cost? She swallowed. We have to think strategically. Perhaps we can pretend to accept his demands, gain the supplies, then maintain our neutrality when the time comes. But Baelish isn't easily duped. Nay. Royce gave a bitter chuckle. He'd see through any false pledge. No, if we promise him soldiers, he'll demand evidence sooner or later. Sarah folded her arms. We could refuse, stand by our vow, and pray we survive until spring. Maybe then we can plant our own crops in the gift, trade with friendlier lords, rebuild on our own terms. Royce looked at her, eyes shadowed with doubt. That's possible. But how many would die before then? How many would desert to the south for food or coin? The morale is already fragile. Cersei closed her eyes, a wave of exhaustion nearly overwhelming her. She thought of Rin in the infirmary, the watchers who'd lost friends on that doomed patrol, the countless criminals who had come here seeking a second chance. They deserved better than a slow death from hunger or a life of forced servitude to a cunning manipulator. She realized that she, Cersei Lannister, once queen and enemy to so many, had found a place here among them. She cared. That, more than anything, weighed heavily on her. Royce let out a long breath and looked at each of them. I won't decide tonight. We'll convene the senior officers tomorrow and discuss. Maybe we'll find some middle ground, or maybe we'll choose the lesser evil. He turned to Cersei, voice gentler. Thank you for what you did, sister. You've done all you could. She bowed her head, drained beyond measure. I wish it were enough. They dispersed, each retreating to what rest they could find. Cersei yearned to check on Rin, but she stumbled to her chamber first, where she stripped off her travel-stained clothes and wrapped herself in a thin blanket. Sleep came quickly, a heavy oblivion that swallowed her dreams. In the days that followed, Castle Black's leadership met in heated councils. Captain Morn from Eastwatch arrived via Raven's escort, carrying news that a small shipment of grain, fish, and cloth was indeed on the way from Baelish's associates. It would buy them a little time, but not enough to last through the entire winter. Meanwhile, rumors trickled in of fresh skirmishes in the south, more claimants to the throne, and roving bands of outlaws. With each dire report, the Watch's predicament seemed more urgent. Some officers argued that they should accept Baelish's terms, if only to survive. Others insisted that neutrality was sacred, that the Watch would lose all credibility if it became another mercenary force. The debates raged, with Royce at the center, listening, weighing. Cersei offered her insights, but she remained torn. She hated Baelish's terms, yet she feared the Watch would collapse without his aid. Ultimately, Royce decided they needed one last attempt at seeking help from the Northern Lords or any sympathetic ear. But if that failed, they might have no choice but to yield. While these debates continued, Cersei often visited Rin in the infirmary, bringing bits of food or simply sitting by her bed. The girl's fever subsided thanks to Alwina's care, and soon she was able to walk around, though she still wore a haunted expression. The Watchers, most of them anyway, welcomed her presence. Another lost soul at the edge of the world, a living reminder that the Night's Watch still had a duty to protect those in need. A bitter wind swept the courtyard each morning, swirling flakes of snow. Patrols came and went, new recruits trickled in from the dungeons of the south, and life at Castle Black trudged on. Cersei resumed her usual duties, training novices in sword drills, overseeing ration distribution, climbing the wall to stand watch under the silent stars. Yet now she did so with a gnawing sense that the future teetered on a knife's edge. At last, a council of the Watch senior officers was held in the main hall, a space normally used for communal meals. They lit every torch and candle to push back the gloom of the stormy day outside. Royce presided at the head of a long table, with Varley, Morn, Arliss, Garth, and other key figures in attendance. Cersei sat near Royce, the only woman in the higher ranks aside from Marley, who stood behind her. The rest of the Watchers who'd traveled south, Hallis, Rogden, Sira, took seats along the perimeter. Royce opened the meeting, summarizing the situation with weary authority. Then the floor was opened for proposals. Marley argued for immediate acceptance of Baelish's terms, emphasizing survival. Morn urged caution, stating that if the Watch took sides in a southern war, they might face reprisals from other lords. Arliss worried about the morale of Watchers who believed in their oath. Garth looked at the supply ledgers, insisting they had perhaps 2 months of rationed food, maybe 3 if Baelish's partial shipment arrived soon. As the debate spiraled, tensions flared. Some pounded the table, claiming the vow was everything. Others hissed that a vow meant nothing if they were too weak to uphold it. Eventually Royce called for quiet and looked at Cersei. "You've spent more time with Baelish than most of us. Do you believe we can appease him without fully binding ourselves to his cause?" She met his gaze, recalling the cunning light in Baelish's eyes. "He wants tangible proof of loyalty. He'll want Watchers to fight for him when the time comes. I don't see a way around that short of lying outright. But Baelish isn't easily deceived." A heavy silence fell. Royce looked down the table, letting the weight of Cersei's words settle. Then Garth cleared his throat. "If we do nothing, we run out of food. That's a fact. We might forage some from the gift, but it's meager. We might trade with passing merchants, but gold is scarce. It's a bleak outlook." A younger officer, Terran, stood. "What if we call on the king in the north, or whomever claims that title now?" Roy shook his head. "The north has its own troubles. They pledged some help before, but not enough to sustain us all winter. And with the crown uncertain, the north can barely feed its own." Morn glanced at Cersei. "What about reaching out to other free cities? Bravos, Pentos? Surely they might trade with us for furs or other northern goods." "Why?" She hesitated. "We have little to offer that can be transported easily. Furs, yes, but we'd need time to gather them. And shipping in winter is risky. Baelish likely has contacts in Bravos too. He could undercut us or sabotage any such deal." Royce exhaled, rubbing his temples. "So we're left with a grim choice. Break our vow and become pawns or risk starvation." Mutters spread around the table. Then Arliss, the maester, spoke in a quiet voice. "There is another possibility. A final gamble. We cling to neutrality. We accept the partial shipment Baelish offers now, and we pray that by the time he demands our swords, the political landscape changes. Perhaps the crown stabilizes, or Baelish's faction collapses, or some miracle spares us the burden of fulfilling that oath." Nay. The Watchers exchanged uncertain glances. Royce looked at Cersei again. Would Baelish settle for a promise with no immediate action so long as we accept his shipment? She considered. "He said he'd give us a fortnight to decide. That means he expects an answer soon. If we sign anything or swear anything, he'll hold us to it eventually. But we might string him along, making him believe we'll comply, while hoping events shift." Nada. Barley frowned. "That's deception. Dangerous." Royce's gaze turned distant. "Everything about this is dangerous, but deception might buy us time." Garth studied the ledgers. "Any solution that buys us a few months might let us survive until spring. Perhaps that's all we need." Finally, Royce stood, silence rippling through the hall. "I make the decision," he said heavily, "for better or worse. We'll send a raven to Baelish, agreeing in principle to his terms, but requesting a delay in finalizing our involvement in any war. We'll accept his shipments in the meantime. That's our best chance to keep the watch alive." Nanda, Bay. No one cheered. No one smiled. They understood the path they were taking was fraught with betrayal and moral compromise. But none offered a better alternative. Royce sank back into his seat, shoulders slumped. "Let it be known, we do this under duress. We will keep our vow to protect the realm as best we can, even if it means dealing with devils." Then the meeting ended, watchers dispersing in grim silence. Outside, the storm had intensified, wind howling over the walls. Cersei stood in the courtyard, snow lashing her face, feeling the weight of the watch's choice. She sensed they had crossed a threshold. In their desperation, they'd allowed Baelish a foothold in their future. Yet, ironically, it was also the only chance to preserve themselves. Perhaps, if fortune favored them, Baelish would be undone by his own schemes before he called on the Watch to fight. Or maybe, in time, the realm would see the wisdom of keeping the Watch strong without forcing it into politics. For now, they marched forward, uncertain and compromised. She caught sight of Rin playing with a stray dog near the stables, giggling as the dog wagged its tail. Marley stood watch over her, arms folded but a hint of warmth in her eyes. That simple scene struck Cersei deeply. Amid the swirling snow and the gloom of unholy bargains, a small girl found a reason to smile. Perhaps that was reason enough to continue. She turned away from the bitter wind, heading inside to find parchment and ink. Her hand would draft the letter to Baelish, sealing a pact that might haunt her. But for all her regrets, she knew the Watchers needed that grain, that cloth, that fish. Life demanded harsh compromises, and she would make them if it meant keeping the Night's Watch alive, if it meant sparing Castle Black the fate of a silent tomb. Once more she reminded herself, survival first, redemption second. As she ascended the steps to Royce's office, she couldn't help but recall the vow she had once sworn. "I shall wear no crowns and win no glory. I shall live and die at my post." She would keep that vow in spirit if not in letter, and pray the realm would forgive what came next.